It's been a long time.
Huh?
Well, maybe compared to the old days, we just have more chances to meet. Anyway, I'm glad to run into you again like this.
Um, I, I don't know what you're...
Judging from your reaction, I'm guessing you forgot about me again. That makes me sad. After all, the last time we met, you swore that you would never forget me.
Today is August 15th. The summer sun blazes in the sky, insects chirp out on the grass, and anyone unfortunate enough to be trudging around out there is sure to have sweat pouring down the back of their necks already. The scenery is distorted in what feels like a haze that never ends, and inevitably, sitting in a bedroom alone as always, a timid girl turns 15 years old. It's 2011 in this story, by the way. I know the date might have thrown you off if you're watching this on upload day. Don't worry, we'll circle back around to the big 26 in a little while, but right now, this decade and some change-old tale is prudent to the one we'll be spinning today. Because something that happened earlier that same year, well, you could say it was pretty important for me. 2011 was a pretty big year in general, really. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, Operation Neptune Spear, and yes, the first full release of Minecraft. Something tells me that mentioning that in the same sentence as the previous two things sounds more than a little weird. But perhaps much less consequential, and yet surprisingly so nevertheless, was the release of a song on February 17th called Jinzo Enemy. Featuring the vocal talents of one Hatsune Miku, the ever-beloved vocal synth software and accompanying fictional diva created by Krypton Future Media, Jinzo Enemy was the debut musical work of one Jin, otherwise known as Shizen no Teki P. For a debut work, it's pretty darn catchy, but arguably nothing incredibly special. Vocaloid, the line of vocal synths that Miku belonged to, had been used a great deal around this time in a boom of all-time heavy-hitter songs that followed a similarly teen, angsty tone, after all. But it was still an intriguing enough premise to catch some attention. A shut-in named Shintaro Kisaragi holed up in his room, being dutifully watched over by an apparent AI companion on his computer who wants nothing more than for him to re-emerge into the world and stop running away from his problems. A plea that ultimately falls on deaf ears when he eventually gets tired of and deletes her. What Jin didn't know at the time, and what indeed nobody knew, was that this one song would unfurl and spawn one of the most successful Vocaloid-adjacent franchises of all time. A series that didn't just spawn multiple albums worth of songs, most with accompanying music videos, but a mixed media juggernaut that spread its wings across manga, novels, and even anime, telling a unique story with many different iterations, each adapting the same base concept, but diverting into equally important branches of narrative that, when all taken together, tells a long-spanning tale of supernatural powers, death, and the sweet summer days of our youths passing us by, all happening one hazy daisy day on August 15th. I've always considered it more than a little funny that the big important story date of the series just happened to be my birthday, and that alone was enough for me to show a bit of interest in it. When I turned 15 years old, I discovered this project, the Kagerou Project, and it's been with me ever since. But surely, given that Kagepro, as its fans affectionately call it, has been inactive for a number of years, it must say something pretty significant that I still lug it around with me over a decade later. Today, upon this upload, August 15th, 2026, I'm turning 30 years old, and Kagepro has turned 15. So I figured now would be the most appropriate time to open the scrapbook and do a bit of digging into that summertime record for myself. This is a retrospective analysis of the Kagerou Project, a tour de force of creative inspiration, youthful exuberance, and what I consider to be the greatest Vocaloid song series of all time. Let's daze. Let's flash briefly back to October 20th, 1990. Jin was born on this day in Hokkaido, Japan, and pretty early on in his life he was already musically inclined, starting to play keyboard in elementary school and learning both from his keyboardist uncle and a dedicated keyboard teacher. By high school he had formed a band, and at the age of 21 he was part of a group doing Toho covers, a man after my own heart. Wait, his favorite manga is Konjiki no Gash? Wow, he really is a man after my own heart. Anyway, around this time, he and the other collaborators in his Toho cover group, a unit called Big Daruma Family, would band together with lyricist Gatchan to create the aforementioned Jinzo enemy. Given the appearance of the character in the initial video, which didn't have a dedicated animation until a popular fan MV was made later on, viewers simply assumed she was supposed to be a version of Hatsune Miku herself, since Miku was used for the song's vocals. Commenters on Nico Nico, the site where the song was hosted, would call her Enemiku, short for Enemy Miku, a reference to the song's title, which would prove pretty funny when this character was given a proper name later on, Ene. Despite having a pretty good debut song though, Jin didn't exactly score instant success. Though he kept up the momentum with the release of a second song, one where he did both the music and lyrics 3 months later on May 29, 2011, with the release of MEKAKUCITY Code, or Chord, whichever you want to call it. The song would mark the beginning of Jin's collaborations with illustrator Shiru, who provided a vast majority of the MV illustrations for the series moving forward. At first, this song didn't appear to have any particular relevance to Jin's previous release though, following a mysterious hooded girl named Tsubomi Kido, who leads a group called the Mekakushidan, or Blindfold Gang, as they look for new members, go on secret missions, and hang around at their hideout. It was a modest success for Jin, though nothing crazy. If you want to talk crazy, well, the next song is where things became very interesting. September 30th, 2011, the song Kagerou Days, whose title would serve as the basis of the project as a whole, was released and quickly skyrocketed Jin's popularity. It was easily the most attention-grabbing of his songs to date, and giving it a listen, it's very easy to see why. Not only is it a catchy, frantic tune which lulls in and out of an anticipatory calm, punctuated by maddening highs, but its narrative told through its lyrics is one that immediately invites intrigue. It's August 15th. A boy named Hibiya Amamiya is in a park with his friend Hiyori Asahina when she follows after a cat and is suddenly mowed down by an oncoming truck. Hibiya, in shock, awakens from what feels like a nightmare and realizes it's the previous day. No matter what he does, the 15th always rolls around and something happens to Hiyori, leading to the same grisly fate. The haze of the heat feels like it's laughing at him, and the process of this same hopeless scenario seems to go on for decades before Hibiya finally makes a choice. This time, he throws himself in front of the truck to save the girl, but when the loop repeats once more, we see that Hiyori herself is lamenting her failure, having been trying to save Hibiya too. The song's popularity would only rise even higher with the release of a fan-made MV created by artist Wanyanpu, a fan work so successful that Wanyanpu herself would actually contribute officially to the series after this, helping Jin to create several official MVs and designing a couple of characters. The introduction of a time loop plotline is one that I feel was bound to draw attention. Time loop narratives are ripe for exploration when it comes to character relationships in general, much less a myriad of themes ripe for the picking and work centering around them. Some of my favorite stories of all time have featured time loops, and the Kagerou Project is no exception. But even so, it still didn't seem to tie back to Jin's previous works, and indeed, this probably remains his single most popular song, creating an interesting story all on its own and able to stand pretty self-contained in that respect regardless. But for those who continued to dig deeper, they would be rewarded. From here on out, the heavy hitters would only continue, albeit featuring Iya primarily, as opposed to Miku. We'd get a Truman Show-esque virtual city on the verge of destruction and headphone actor, a lonely Medusa who lives alone in the forest after she was attacked and her mother was murdered, only to be brought into the outside world by a kindly boy in Imagination Forest, and perhaps most intriguingly, a pale MMO character-looking-ass boy named Konoha trying to save the children from Kagerou Days in a song called Konoha's State of the World. Yeah, that one catches the eye, doesn't it? And indeed, Imagination Forest also featured some continuity. Once the song's lead character, Mary, is taken into the outside world by the boy named Seto, she meets Kido from MEKAKUCITY Code, and now we have even more crossover happening? Especially given that Konoha's song ends with a lineup of multiple characters, some we've seen and some we hadn't yet. This is the inciting moment where Kagerou Project went from a series of what seemed like unconnected songs to a myriad of crisscrossing narratives that were all converging in on each other, and you'd better believe people were interested to see where that went. By the time of the next song, Kisaragi Attention, in May of 2012, the project had already garnered enough popularity to secure 2 ongoing adaptations, the Kagerou Days novels, which began the same month, and the Kagerou Days manga the following month. Both of these stories were written by Jin, with art for the latter being done by Mahiro Sato. The first proper album also released at this time, MEKAKUCITY Days, which included even more songs to fill in story gaps, like NA's Cyber Journey, Dead and Seek, Transparent Answer, and Shinigami Record. Things were going at breakneck speed lead for the young producer, and it seemed like everybody in the Japanese multimedia sphere wanted a piece of the Kagerou pie. But Jin wasn't content to simply tell the same story 3 times over between his songs and these new branches, because though the novels and manga would start off similarly, expanding upon the world and characters presented in Jin's music, their narratives would quickly diverge from each other, depicting what seemed like totally different events. Let's pause for just a second. Though I did want to go a little more granularly over the origins of the project and its initial evolution when discussing that first handful of songs, I don't want this video to be a full series recap video. There's a few great Kagerou story videos out there. I'd highly recommend this one by Breadbox and this one by Kite.io covering the series' release history, but from here on we're going to be speaking a little more broadly about the series, its story, and its themes. I'm going to try to briefly, insofar as that is even possible, give you an overview of important stuff if you're not familiar with the series, so that you can stay in the loop. But please note the story of the Kagerou Project is really complicated, like notoriously so. This stuff feels a little Kingdom Hearts at times if you're picking up what I'm putting down, so if you ever find yourself losing track, try not to panic, because that is a nigh universal Kagerou fan experience. If you find yourself looking up and liking any of the songs or being interested in any of the characters, you'll probably end up diving deeper for yourself later, and things will become clearer then. This is just kind of the vibe when you first become invested in this stuff, trust me. Anyway, in case you haven't gotten the hints yet, Kagerou as a whole has to do with the time loop depicted in Kagerou Days, and in fact, that song is the name of the loop itself. It's a little more complicated than just a funny time loop world with an evil truck that's more magnetized to crushing children than a Tesla though, so bear with me. The series is split into various different mediums, and though several of them contain a lot of similar events, they're all different iterations of the same story. The songs, the manga, the novels, and an anime series MEKAKUCITY actors all contain similar events, the same cast of characters, and the same general world building. But due to story events we'll try our best to go over briefly, all of these iterations of the story go in different directions and ultimately reach different conclusions. So you may ask yourself, is there any one version better than the rest? Can I just stick with one of my preference and get everything out of it that way? The short answer is no. The long answer is no. When I say that Kagerou is mixed media, I truly do mean mixed media. Each version of the story is a component of the larger narrative, not a complete narrative in and of itself. To get everything out of this story, and indeed to even really understand it, you need to go through all of it. The songs obviously serve as the basis and overall backbone of the story, and I'd argue in many ways it is Kagerou at its purest, but only so much information can be conveyed through lyrics and animated music videos. It's like watching somebody's OC animatic on YouTube. It's very intriguing, but you have to have a really studious eye for this stuff to pick up on the actual story going on between these songs. And even then, it's basically required for you to look at the other adaptations in order to even begin understanding and filling in the blanks that the songs just can't on their own. But to even explain the nature of what each branch provides, that will require us to go back to the story's origins. The following segment is mostly story, recap, and stuff about watch order for the newbies. If you're already intimately familiar with Kagerou, you can feel free to skip to the next chapter of the video at this timecode. Thanks. At the beginning of Kagerou's world, in the depths of dark nothingness, was a Medusa, a woman named Azumi. Wishing to understand herself, Azumi inadvertently creates the world in which we live, a sandbox to explore herself, which eventually becomes home to humans, vectors through which she can observe her own reflection, and in turn perhaps begin to understand what or who she is. Azumi is hated by humanity, however, often tormented and targeted as a monster because of her snake-like traits and other mysterious powers. Through the ages, she flip-flops between being revered, worshipped, and hunted. Throughout all of these years, Azumi creates mysterious snakes that serve as the basis for her various supernatural abilities, all born out of a necessity in her journey of self-discovery and protection. One day, Azumi encounters a human man named Tsukihiko, who is hopelessly in love with her at first sight. Having been turned away from war and treated as a general nuisance by everyone after the death of his family, he drops literally everything to build a house for Azumi away from the prying eyes of humanity, as is her smarmily worded wish. She doesn't actually expect him to do it, but several years later, not only has he, but he's wormed his way into her heart as well, eventually ending in their impromptu marriage, moving in together, and the birth of their child, Shion. But not everything remains rosy. One day, one of Azumi's snakes, the Snake of Clearing Eyes, notices that she's discontent. Originally, Azumi had created Clearing Eyes in a wish to understand herself, a wish which gave it a level of sentience slightly higher than the rest. In its mind, this wish had been long ago diverted from because of Azumi's interference with humanity and her decision to have a family, and it feared that it no longer had a proper function. At the same time, Azumi is becoming fearful, realizing that despite her immortal nature, her very mortal family will live a very short time compared to her. Having spent so much of her existence alone and misunderstood, Azumi doesn't want to return to the times of her isolation, does not want to experience the death of the only people she cares about, and so she's offered a tempting plan by her own snake. Create an eternal world where you and your family can live forever, a world called the Kagerou Days. Though Azumi does ultimately relent and plans to leave the human world with her family, it is Tsukihiko's insistence on having a proper wedding ceremony beforehand that ultimately leads to an unexpected tragedy. The humans come for them, badly beating Tsukihiko and attacking Azumi and Shion. In the process of trying to protect herself and also wanting to spare her family the further torment of being associated with her, Azumi is whisked into the days alone, only to realize it is a hell of her own making, one she was tricked into by her own snake. But what does this snake want? Well, that remains to be seen. Time marches on. Shion eventually has a child of her own, Mary Kozukura, and lives alone with her in their family home, determined never to let her out for fear of human persecution. Unfortunately, as before, it arrives all the same, and both Shion and her daughter are killed, only narrowly preserved when Azumi drags them into the days. Because Azumi's snakes give power through granting wishes, she's able to sacrifice one to give new life. Shion refuses to take the snake, wanting her daughter to live, and thus Mary is returned alone to the world with the snake of combining eyes. Now that Azumi has lost the ability that created the Kagerou Days in the first place, she is no longer able to control it, suffering alone with Shion in the days for years to come. Because her last command to the days was to save the lives taken on that day, August 15th, it would proceed to select people who died on each subsequent August 15th forevermore, occasionally granting one of Azumi's snakes to compatible hosts who had similar wishes in their hearts. In a house fire, Tsubomi Kido dies alongside her sister, and having wanted to disappear, is granted the snake of concealing eyes, which allow her to turn invisible. In a river, Kosuke Seto drowns alongside his dog companion, having wished to understand people's thoughts because of how cruelly he was treated by them, and obtains the snake of stealing eyes, allowing him to hear those thoughts telepathically. In a lonely apartment, Kano Shuya is killed alongside his abusive mother by a burglar, and is given the snake of deceiving eyes, in response to his wish to often hide the wounds inflicted by his mother. In the ocean, Momo Kisaragi drowns alongside her father, and having wanted to get as much attention as her genius older brother Shintaro, gains the snake of drawing eyes, which draws an inordinate amount of attention her way. Mysteriously killed after what initially seems like another narcoleptic episode, Takane Enomoto dies in her school, and having wished to escape the confines of her body, is given the snake of opening eyes, which allows her to disconnect from her physical body and become the virtual girl Ene. In a hazy summertime loop, Hibiya Amamiya dies alongside Hiyori Asahina in a deadly accident, and is given the snake of focusing eyes, which allow him to locate anything in the world, born from his wish to find Hiyori. On the same day as his classmate Takane, Haruka Kokonose dies of a disease he's had from birth, and is given the snake of awakening eyes, which would have given him an ideal body in response to his wish for a healthy one, though he refuses it, leaving him trapped in the days as the snake itself manifests in the world, resembling his game character, Konoha. All of these children are united by fate, drawn in by the combining eyes snake possessed by Mary, which when all gathered together will turn her into a new Medusa. But Mary herself is unaware of this and has no inherent desire to weaponize her powers like her grandmother might have in the past. Unfortunately for Mary, this is where the snake of clearing eyes comes into play. In most loops of the story, clearing eyes is obtained by Kenjiro Tateyama, the teacher of Haruka and Takane, as well as Momo later on, and the adoptive father of Kano, Kido, and Seto. In a landslide, he and his wife Ayaka are killed, and he desperately wishes to see her again, his strong desire being pursued as the Clearing Eyes Snake's new wish. But the Clearing Eyes Snake is, as I said before, a bit more sentient than the rest, and it has a similar fear of mortality to its master Azumi. Centrally, the Clearing Eyes Snake knows that once it's fulfilled the wish it is assigned, it will lose its sentience and therefore disappear. To avoid this, it will often take direct control of its host, and while ostensibly pursuing the host's wish for as long as possible, will also stave his goal off to avoid its own demise, carefully planting seeds in the meanwhile to gather the rest of the snakes to enact the tragedy. This tragedy, seen in the song Outer Science, is, simply put, a massacre, where the Clearing Eyes Snake takes possession of Konoha's body and uses its super strength to wipe out all of the characters. Obviously distraught from having her friends murdered, Mary absorbs all of the snakes and without much thought at all uses the Combining Eyes ability to reverse time back to the world's conception, allowing events to play out all over again with slight variations. Ultimately, the Clearing Eyes snake wants to utilize this universal reset to prolong its own pursuit of a wish, and therefore its own life forever. Don't listen to the talking snake indeed. Oh, and before I forget her, sorry you loop time again, I can't help it, there's also Ayano Tateyama, Kenjiro's biological daughter, who plays a huge narrative role too. She's the original founder of the MEKAKUCITY, having acted as a big sister to all of the adopted kids and teaching them that their red eyes were nothing to fear, because red is the color of a hero, so says Kamen Rider. She was also school friends with Takane, Haruka, and Shintaro. Having discovered the horrible things Clearing Eyes had planned for both her family and friends, she throws herself off the roof of her school on August 15th to enter the days, obtain the Snake of Favoring Eyes, and stay trapped there to prevent all of the snakes from being gathered, thereby trying to foil the Clearing Eyes snake's plan. Unfortunately for her, though, that time loop she doesn't know about kind of makes it a moot point. She did this all on her own without telling anyone her reasons, though, or well, without telling most people her reasons. So this kinda screws up a lot of the characters who knew her, leading to the Don leaving home, among other reasons, as well as putting Shintaro in such a huge depression that he becomes a shut-in, thus explaining why he's like that in Jinzo Enemy. Well, I guess Takane and Haruka died the same day too, so I imagine that has something to do with it. Poor guy lost his whole circle in a single day. Also, if you're wondering how Hibiya and Hiyori are related to any of this beyond traffic accident, Hiyori is actually the estranged younger sister of Ayaka, which kinda makes her Ayano's aunt, despite being like 7 years younger than her. Weird. This means she's staying with Kenjiro in the city, which is how she meets Konoha, since Clearing is keeping him locked up, and Hibi is just there because he has a crush on Hiyori, and he lied about going to some seminar about Indian culture so he could hang around and be her bag boy for the week, after his parents threw him to the wolves for like 8 consecutive days. Don't worry, he's having a very normal childhood. Most loops generally involve all of the MEKAKUCITY meeting each other, getting wrapped up in some shenanigans, discovering some things about the twisted loop that has them ensnared, then trying, and usually failing, to overcome the snake that has them all wrapped up in its influence. Their relationships grow stronger, are tested, and the summer chews them up and spits them out. But they never stop reaching for daylight. And with that all explained, we can finally start to peel back the layers of each branch of the story, and centrally, what I think Kagerou as a story is all about. Like I said before, the songs serve as the general backbone of the work, providing a lot of the central themes, starts of character arcs, and broad strokes of the story. You don't really get a lot of the in-between, but you do get the most important stuff generally. The manga is next in the recommended story order after the first 2 main albums worth of music. While it initially depicts what seems like a fairly average loop of the story, albeit one that ends remarkably quickly with Clearing Eyes showing up to crazy murder the kids in broad daylight, it quickly changes course to depict a different loop, commonly accepted to be the first loop, which diverges pretty significantly from the common structure of the rest of the series, and sets up for some pretty important story points that will become relevant far later. The novels are more or less your average Kagerou loop at play. Due to the medium, this is where we get the most in-depth exploration for individual characters and the juiciest drama. Because the manga's core narrative is more of a unique one, and its version of the average loops ends so soon, this is the most cohesive version of the average narrative you're going to get. Though toward the very end, it does arguably become the story at its finest, in my opinion. Having a, while not conclusive or necessarily happy, incredibly cathartic ending nevertheless. It's like the Minagoroshi hen of Kagerou, you know? That made sense to like 5 people. And then finally, the anime, MEKAKUCITY Actors, depicts the story's final loop and ultimately the good ending, as it were, which sort of coincides with the final narrative song, Summertime Record. Put simply though, if you ever tried this anime out back in the day and found yourself hopelessly confused, that would be why. MEKAKUCITY Actors is not a standalone story adaptation. It is the conclusion to a multi-part narrative, and it does not go out of its way to explain much to the uninitiated, at least in its final couple of episodes, and thus its biggest narrative payoffs. So, with that said, what's the order we're working with here? Well, I'm sure some people will disagree with my assessment, but I'm gonna go along these lines. These projects were all sort of coming out concurrently, so it's not as if there was only one medium going on at a time. In fact, despite chronologically containing some of the earliest story content, the manga was one of the last things to be finished, so working on release order is probably not going to do you a lot of good. Consuming Kagerou back in the day was not easy to follow, and to save you some of the suffering if you're interested archivally, you'd probably be better off just doing this in delineated chunks rather than trying to worry about chronology or release order. So with that said, here's my recommended order of viewing Kagerou. First, start off with the music. Here's an order that I like. Jinzo Enemy, Mekakushi Code, Kagerou Days, Headphone Actor, Imagination Forest, Transparent Answer, NA Cyber Journey, Konoha State of the World, Kisaragi Attention, Shinigami Record, Children Record, Yobanashi Deceive, Shonen Brave, Gunjo Rain, Dead and Seek, Lost Time Memory, Ayano's Theory of Happiness, Otsukimi Recital, UK Yesterday, Outer Science, Mary's Fictional World, and Summertime Record. Now, technically you might want to save that last one for the end of everything, but that's your choice. Just know that it's kind of considered the good ending of the series, and it may be a bit of a whiplash going back narratively with everything else, especially since it's coming right off of Outer Science, which depicts the typical bad ending for every unsuccessful route. Next up, read the manga, called Kagerou Days, not to be confused with the light novels, which have the same title. It's 13 volumes, and they're all pretty thin. I was able to get through them all in just a couple of reading sessions, so it won't take you too long. Next up is the chunky part. You'll need to read the light novels, and there are 8 of them. While each of them average around 170-ish pages, which is not super long, they'll definitely take you a fair bit longer to read than the manga, and they contain a lot of important stuff, so really buckle down for this one. This took me a little over a week. In order, the titles are In a Daze, A Headphone Actor, The Children Reason, The Missing Children, The Deceiving, Over the Dimension, From the Darkness, and Summertime Reload. Once you're done with that, you can finally move on to the final route, MEKAKUCITY Actors, a 12-episode anime produced by Studio Shaft. Again, this is the final route, so make sure you've gotten everything else done before watching this, or you're probably going to be pretty lost. If you haven't listened to Summertime Record yet, you can also do that when you finish this off. As for anything else, most other material is spin-off stuff that you can take at your leisure. If you're wondering about a continuation, well, 3 things you should never ask a Kagerou fan. 1. When the anime they announced a while back is happening. 2. Who this kid in the Kagerou Days video is. It's fan-made. And 3. What Kenjiro Tateyama's birthday is. Now, fair warning, now that we're pretty much finally done with this section and the set dressing as a whole, I'm gonna start talking about spoilers for the entirety of the series in a pretty freeform fashion. This isn't like a thing where each medium will have its own section and respective recap. I'm here to get into the analysis mind. So while these basics should more or less have you covered if you're just a video watcher and have no interest in seeking the series out for yourself, I think it should go without saying by now that I think Kagerou, despite being as complicated as it is well worth your time, so feel free to use this guide I just gave you to give it a look, whether it be before the following essay or after. Either way, I hope it piqued your curiosity into checking the series out. Anyway, enough of all of this, time for the real meat and potatoes. As a piece of young adult media, it should probably come as no surprise that Kagerou is about something that encompasses a vast swath of said demographics fiction. Over and over again, we tell ourselves the stories of how we grow up, what that looks like, and how to be okay with it. But more than that, I think, beyond being about growing up, Kagerou asks the pretty fundamental question of when and how that moment comes for a person. And the answer, usually, is from within the context of grief. To those of you who've never experienced the death of a close loved one, well, first of all, can I say, please enjoy that bliss for as long as you possibly can. Seriously. Second of all, I can say with a lot of certainty, having talked to a lot of people I know who share that experience, that it's a sort of communal thing. It's a almost universal feeling that basically everyone experiences at one point or another, and it fundamentally changes who you are as a person. The you that you are before that point is not the same person afterward, and it puts you on a level with other people in a more immediately sobering way than a lot of other shared experiences do. While not exclusively, Kagerou Project's deaths, especially backstory deaths, heavily feature that of parents. Shintaro and Momo's dad, Kano's mother, Ayano's mother, Mary's mother, on and on like this. And one of the things that I've talked about with friends who've also lost a parent before is the immediate sense of isolation that comes with it. It is a feeling of immediately knowing that you will have to be more self-reliant because the support you've consistently taken for granted has suddenly vanished. And even if you're not completely parentless, it puts things into stark perspective. You could be at any moment, and all you would have to rely on is you. That's a scary thought, but one that again most of us will have to contend with at some point. So therefore, I think the Kagerou in its base story is already approaching a very interesting angle when it comes to the topic of growing up. The idea of the inciting trauma or loss that forces you to begin becoming an adult. The time in your life when you transition from believing that the world around you cares for you and is a happy place, and understanding that it's often not, that it's an uncaring, cruel place where things can and will hurt you. This thematic tie to death is also very emblematically displayed by the story's obsession with the date August 15th. Beyond just being my birthday, this date does actually have significance here. And it's not just because it happens to be the day where all the important stuff happens, because outside of the diegetic, let's pull back for a second, what's the Doyleist reasoning here? Why did Jin pick that date? And it should become incredibly clear if you consider the stretch of time that this date lands on in Japan, and in the story itself, Obon holiday. For those of you who don't know, Obon is a religious holiday which takes place across 3 days, commonly in July or August, but traditionally around the 15th, thus August 15th. It specifically centers around honoring the spirits of your ancestors, wherein people typically have family reunions, make trips to old family places, clean graves, and guide spirits. It's also tied to music, as the Bon dance typically accompanies the holiday as well. So yeah, by setting his story in this specific time frame and having August 15th be the most important date, I think it's pretty clear that death is an important component of the story Kagerou was trying to tell. All of the central characters in the MEKAKUCITY are also affected by death directly in ways that force them to either grow up or grapple with their place in life, whether it be Shintaro's decision to shut himself off after Ayano's death, Kido's decision to step up and model herself after both of her big sisters, biological and adopted, after losing them, Kano's decision to lie to his family about the circumstances of Ayano's sacrifice to keep them safe from further danger, or indeed, and most consequentially, Mary's decision to constantly reset the world after witnessing all of her friends die. This all has a common origin point though, doesn't it? Azumi. Azumi's tale is not just the inciting tale of the creation of Kagerou's world and the days, it is a tale that thematically replays itself throughout numerous smaller character stories in the larger Kagerou tapestry. It is Azumi's anxiety over the finite nature of her family's life that starts all of this, after all.
When the time comes that we're parted, I can cry then, with all my heart. I'd give him all the abuse I could muster.
Why did you die first?
I'll say.
You said you'd be with me forever!
That would probably unnerve him. He was always so pathetically weak against my self-centered griping. Did he think he could just scratch his head and apologize for that? I'd like to see him try. As I pondered over this, I suddenly realized that my tears were dripping down into the pages of my journal. My breathing was tight. I tried holding it back, but the loneliness seemed to stream out of every pore. I resolved to do away with the tears not a moment ago. Am I really this much of a fool? I can't stand it. I don't want him to go. I want to be together forever.
But this is also the inciting sin at the heart of the story too. It is Azumi's wish to never lose anything that leads to the creation of the Kagerou days, the empowering of the Clearing Eyes snake, and everything that happens as a result afterward. There's a reason why the story's most infamous side loop, Route XX, ends before it can really get off the ground, precisely because Shintaro leads himself into a dead end. And how does he do that? Well, sure, he kills NA, first of all, then gives up on himself entirely too, but what's the inciting factor behind that? It's that he steeps himself fully in his memory of Ayano and refuses to experience anything new. He simply returns to the same artificial rote replays of the same memories over and over, hoping they can be enough, but they never will. After all, he's not changing. He's not going anywhere. Mary mirrors her grandmother in this instance perhaps most powerfully though, because her proliferation of the universal reset is one that consistently leads to the same horrible conclusion, and acts as the thematic core of the project as a whole. The Kagerou Days is a world of stagnancy, of infinite life, but also a complete dead end when it comes to growth, an eternal world where nothing changes. Clearing Eyes desires this unending loop because it simply prolongs its own existence, a literal Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. It has basically no value outside of an absence of death, and here the absence of death is equated with a lack of the possibility of change, of true growth for the living. After all, what is the presence of death in your life, if not also necessarily something you'll have to move on from eventually? Not because the life you lost doesn't matter. Obviously, of course it does, but because for yourself, it's a sign that you're able to pick yourself back up and rely on yourself. You can stand proudly on your own 2 feet, not just because you've gone through that growth, but because that growth was spurred by what you've lost. Nothing lasts forever, but that's what makes it special. And you know what also doesn't last forever? The summer.
What's happening in the outside world? I hope it's not winter at least. It's too quiet then, and there's almost nothing to break the monotony. I'd prefer it to be summer, ripe with boundless change.
There are few things more synonymous with the DNA of coming-of-age media than the picturesque summer. For those of us who went to school, summer was the brief but brilliant respite that we hungered for all year, an opportunity to break free from the shackles of regimented life and embrace the possibilities of freedom and the lack of responsibility. Even if all we did with the freedom we were afforded was sleep, eat junk food, and browse the internet. Listen, don't judge me. But equally important in all those pieces of media, I think, is how that concept of summer is utilized to tell a story in and of itself. After all, it's a microcosm of the very nature of childhood. Think about it. What was the worst part of summer vacation, aside from the fact that it was incredibly hot? God, I hated living in Georgia for that. It's the fact that for as long as it feels like you waited for it, it was always gone so soon after. A couple of months off from school sounded like a total luxury at times like that, because time moved so much slower when we were kids. But even so, it was never quite enough. Just as soon as it came, so too did it feel like it went. And now that I'm older, it feels like just about every year's worth of time goes like that. Ostensibly 60% of my current lifetime as of this video's publishing was spent as a child, and yet despite that being a very significant chunk of my lived experience, I feel like it went by in the blink of an eye. In this sense, the summer has a bit of a thematic and aesthetic duality within Kagerou Project. It is, as Azumi said, ripe with boundless change. It's the time for children to rise up and charge forward into warfront fantasies, joining their hands to fight for their tomorrow. The brink of summer is itself a call to action, a recognition that as the year carries on, so too will things change. But the characters in Kagerou Project are never really allowed to leave the summer, as it becomes the very endless loop they try to escape. The actual in-universe world of the Kagerou days is named after this very aesthetic choice too. Kagerou in this context means heat haze, the distorted shimmering air you see when the heat is at its peak. This can also refer, however, to the mayfly, an insect known for its short life, similar to a cicada.
A few boring moments went by like that, then the sound of a crying cicada wafted into the otherwise empty room. I never liked that sound very much. It was nice enough if you thought of it as one of the classic natural signs of summer and all that, but when the crying just went on forever and ever, it got painful after a while. They were hella loud day and night, and yet they wouldn't even survive past the summer. Some people treated that like, ooh, look at 'em, making the most of the one summer they're given. I knew that well enough, but seeing their dried-up bodies lining the sidewalks, like they undoubtedly would before long, seemed unbearable to me. Lying on their backs like that, desiccated as they waited for the earth to claim them again, I wondered what they thought about it. I wondered if they were ever interested in what the world looks like after summer. If they did have thoughts like that, I couldn't imagine how cruel it was for them. Once summer wraps up, winter soon follows, freezing your body and your soul. Their bodies weren't made to survive that. God never gave these guys anything past the summer at all.
The days itself, then, is a reflection of this ephemerality, locked in time, the heat haze of summer personified within a single unchanging world, only distorted in ways, like a mirage that suggests something more that is not actually there. It is a rejection of change for fear of what that change will bring, and in the rejection of change, we also see a rejection of the growth beyond childhood. One thing that is commonly felt among those dealing with grief, and especially trauma, in their adolescence, is a feeling of stunted growth. The feeling that what has happened to you is so overwhelmingly awful at such a sensitive time in your life that even when you grow older, you feel as though you're stuck as a child, unable to move on past the normal life you were so cruelly robbed of when you should have been experiencing that limited time you had to the fullest. This is pretty evident in several characters in Kagerou, whether it be the youthful exuberance of Ene distilled in a virtual avatar, the dilated time of Hibiya's loop lasting for what feels like decades even though he remains a young boy, or the way Momo's idol agency in the anime literally appears to her through the vector of a stuffed bear, a symbol of something comforting and familiar, which will simultaneously chew her up and spit her out for its own benefit, an appeal to join an industry that will literally capitalize on her youth while offering her none of the care she deserves in exchange. A bit sadly ironic when you consider how Jin himself has been treated by some of the very companies he signed his work over to when he was similarly very young. We'll loop back around to that later. At its most extreme, though, it doesn't escape me that Mary, as a character, is almost perfectly emblematic of this phenomenon in a symbolic way. As a partial Medusa, Mary ages slower than regular humans, and though it's said that the time she spent in Azumi's old forest home is over 100 years, she still looks like a young girl. Furthermore, because of her incredible isolation and relatively limited knowledge of the outside world until she's brought away by Seto, she acts like it too. She is for all intents and purposes still a child. And just as she begins to interact with the world she's been avoiding due to her overwhelming fear and loss, she's once again subjected to even crueler circumstances because of the Clearing Eye Snake's plan, which is, of course, the trigger for the time loop. Sure, textually, Mary is an over-century-old part snake lady who just matures really, really slowly, but this fact of her character ties directly into the actual narrative implications of her character. Her experiences with death have literally trapped her in an unending adolescence, which again and again fails to be broken through. I find it interesting that in the beginning moments of the anime, we're shown a shot of multiple ringing bells, which immediately reminded me of the opening shot of Adolescence of Utena, the feature film for the Revolutionary Girl Utena series. Another series which has a lot to say about stagnation and the delusions of childhood, and the victimization inherent to being stuck as a child. Bells also remind me of funerals, of course, the anticipation of death, though bells are rung for many reasons, like ringing in a new year, the end and the beginning, a call to the start of life and the fear of its end. Sometimes, though we yearn to change ourselves, it can be terrifying. I don't want things to change. I don't want this moment to end. I wish this could last forever. But
that's how the world works much of the time. Whenever you run into something new that helps you understand things from your past for the first time. Encountering today makes you realize what yesterday was. Encountering morning teaches you what night means. It was just a little while ago when an encounter with winter made me realize what summer was all about. Once I learned how to discover all of these things, I realized for the first time that this world is in a constant state of dramatic change. After the darkness that ruled over me up to now, this world and all the wide variety of things that covered every inch of it seemed to transform every time I blinked.
And with that, there comes perspective, right? The way we shape ourselves is in response to the mirrored images of others that we see. Quite literally, in Kagerou's story, the world is created nigh unconsciously by Azumi because she uses it as a vector with which to understand her own self. And through the myriad of differing characters in Kagerou and their stories, we can see these themes reflected back to us in different ways that help us understand how people navigate these struggles in their lives. For some, the ephemerality of life is eased by the accumulation of memory and experience. I'm sure that even now you can probably catch yourself uttering some turn of phrase or having some sort of weird habit that's the result of time you spent with someone who rubbed off on you or introduced you to something. There's something comforting to me about knowing that things I say or do have manifested similarly in the way my friends speak. My mother told me fairly recently that the way I sometimes say anywho is a comfort to her because she knows it wasn't something she taught me, but rather is something my late father said all the time. You're constantly carrying each other's torches. In the sixth light novel, in a conversation between Haruka and Shintaro, they reflect on how their own habits have become part of each other's lives.
Is that the kind of thing you want to spend your money on, though, Shintaro? I know you weren't a huge fan of sugary foods, and here you bought this whole big cake. Oh, I'm starting to dig him a little more now, he replied as he helped himself to a slice. I think I was just being a picky eater is all. This is good. That was a relief to see. It didn't look like he was putting on an act either. Hey, didn't you say that the first time you drank that soda? I remember how funny I thought that was. I don't think I've seen anyone enjoy a soda more than you did at that exact moment. Shintaro scratched his head out of embarrassment. Well, I meant it, dude. That really amazed me. I mean, I pretty much never go a day without a can any longer. Guess I owe you for that one, Haruka. Owe me? I laughed. Yeah, I guess you owe me for all the cavities you're gonna get, Shintaro. Shintaro laughed. Guess so.
And speaking of the things we impart on others, just like those many cans of cola Shintaro is constantly guzzling down, let's talk about the color red. The color red is another thematic fulcrum of the project that has a multitude of meanings. Red is the color of the eyes of every ability user in Kagerou, the color granted to them by the snakes they gain from the days. When I think of the color red, I think naturally one of the first things that would come to anyone's mind in association is that of blood, which has a connotation of violence or something grim. This is not too dissimilar from the way the children come to view their red eyes as something that makes them monsters, unnatural, undesirable, and outcast. Yeah, in case you needed another reminder of the harsh realities of adolescence. One of my favorite moments in the series, however, comes from the song Ayano's Theory of Happiness, wherein we learn about Ayano Tateyama becoming a big sister to the initial members of the MEKAKUCITY when they were adopted into her family. She sees the way they loathe themselves for the red in their eyes, and in a simple act of kindness, tries to do what she can to make them feel like they belong. To this end, she retrieves a red muffler scarf that she has and wears it, even though it's hot out. She's not the only person in this series who's constantly wearing a red piece of clothing when it's hot out, by the way. Wonder why. She does this as a reference to the scarf worn by Kamen Rider, a popular tokusatsu hero, proclaiming that red is the color of a hero, and coming up with fun missions to go on with everyone to make them feel as though they fit in. This is at the heart of what the MEKAKUCITY becomes throughout the story too. Really, when you think about it, despite play acting and saying they go on secret missions, the reality of the Don's daily activities for the most part comes down to simply recruiting people who lie outside of the norm like them. People of common life experiences which alienate or other them from society, who join hands to feel less alone. If you want to put it generally, it's not unlike finding your niche or a gaggle of friends as a kid, or bonding with people who've experienced similar loss to you, or similar trauma to you. But speaking of trauma, I think the red naturally correlates to this too. After all, the eye powers are gained in the process of unimaginable suffering. The red then becomes a thematic struggle between the shattering of childhood innocence, the introduction of violent, disarming elements into your life, and the sense of heroic power that comes with taking a stand against it, of using the experiences you've gone through to push toward personal growth, find your people, and overcome that which tries to bring you down. After all, the eye powers narratively never remain exclusively detriments to the Don. They literally use their powers to help each other, whether it be in small ways like Kido using her concealing eyes to make things easier for Momo, or even bigger situations, like everyone combining their abilities to fight the Clearing Eye Snake's plans, and ultimately, literally combine them when Mary uses her full potential as a Medusa to swallow everyone into the days at the end of MEKAKUCITY Actors, literally resolving everyone's endless childhood by forcing Clearing Eyes to complete the wish he was assigned, freeing them from his eternal grasp, giving Hiyori a new life, and letting them all become adults. There's also no better way in my mind to represent this than through the power of the retaining eyes used by Shintaro, something we'll touch on a little more in terms of what that means in a little bit, but for those of you who already get what I mean, I don't know. Isn't it really appropriate that someone like Mary, who's subjected to the same tormentous childhood again and again, who is literally trapped within what feels like such a disempowered role, is empowered by memory, by experience? Lifetimes worth of living, of making friends, of struggling through blood and tears coalesces into a cascade of power. Because for the children who are exploited, it is experience which makes them strong, knowledge which gives them the opportunity to recognize what it looks like when someone tries to take advantage of their lack of it. It is the cusp of adulthood taking form that shouts bravely that they will not accept that pain anymore. And what bookends the start of this scene? The bells. The end. The beginning. Again. It's probably no secret, if you look at some of my favorite pieces of media of all time, the time loops tend to rank pretty high for me for some reason. Between stuff like Kagepro, Higurashi, Madoka, and so on, it's definitely a recurring interest. There are a lot of reasons I think there are for that, probably more than we have time to get into right now, but one thing that definitely strikes me as a consistently interesting aspect of time loop storytelling is the idea of gradual growth. The idea that with repetition, there is an incremental slide toward victory. Because functionally a time loop story allows the characters to reach the fail state again and again, we get to explore their characters in a lot more depth than a single linear narrative would allow. We get to see the characters at their absolute worst, explore how they could dig themselves even further, and then feel the pure catharsis of watching them still manage to pull it all together. I alluded to this a little bit before, like with Rude XX, but this is made even more interesting to me by things like the Kagerou Days manga. Like I said before, the manga timeline is unique in that it basically shows the first loop of the story, and in the process we get additional characterization for one of the characters who, frankly, sorely needed it. Ayano. Ayano is a character who I deeply care about, and probably projected on a little more than is healthy when I was younger. Hi Ben, nice of you to nod to that statement. Love you too, man. But for as much as I do, and always have loved Ayano, it's hard to say that she's always been the best character in terms of her utilization, in my opinion. Kagepro is no stranger to, as I'm sure you've realized, utilizing character death specifically for the arcs of other characters. There are enough dead moms in this series to form a bridge over the rapids. Ayano is at first no exception to this. Her role in Transparent Answer and Lost Time Memory is to essentially serve as Shintaro's sad backstory. I'm not gonna say it's not emotionally evocative, like, trust me, I totally get it, and Transparent Answer in particular is a pretty harrowing exploration of something that could feasibly happen to a lot of kids in school if you don't think of it in the context of further plot revelations. But the word fridging still inevitably comes to mind when I think about Ayano in this context. Even when Ayano's theory of happiness dropped, it fleshed her character out a lot more, but still definitely gave her a very angelic, perfect vibe. She's more of a symbol in the story at that point than anything else. But then comes the manga to help with this. Considering this came a lot later in the series, I don't know if this is something Jin always planned for, or if it's something he did as a response to possible criticism over time, but I think as part of a partial reframing alongside another song I'll talk about in just a moment, it's actually quite brilliant. Because you see, manga Ayano is like an actual person. And what I mean by that is that manga Ayano is actually kind of mean. To a veteran Kagepro fan reading through the manga, Ayano's introduction was actually kind of a shock, because not only is she alive and a lot more disaffected, she's literally on bad terms with the rest of her family. This is the result of Mary literally being adopted into her family at the exact same time as her other 3 siblings, taking a similar role to them before the landslide that takes her mother's life. This time, it kills both of her parents permanently, and they were on their way to study Mary's old forest home when this happened. Oops. Being a teenager and very upset, she obviously blames Mary for this, and the more she learns, the less she is willing to tolerate it. Though the conclusion she comes to, trying to kill Mary to protect her remaining family, is pretty cruel, it's hard to entirely blame her for coming to this conclusion. Like, yeah, the Clearing Eye Snake's plan literally hinges on Mary, and hinges on killing those close to her to make her act in a specific way. Even disregarding the whole blame game of how her parents came to die, it's difficult not to see where Ayano's line of logic comes from, though it's equally easy to see why her other siblings outright reject her for this. For the remainder of the manga's narrative, we see her struggle with this want to reconnect, but alienation that forces her into isolation. In a way, she's kind of a mirror of Shintaro in the present narrative, literally living completely alone, not knowing how to move on with her life after an incredible loss. It's in meeting Shintaro, and specifically seeing the ways in which he strives to protect those close to him, that she begins to be more proactive, reconnecting with her former siblings and working to understand Mary's plight, rather than place the blame entirely on her shoulders. And in the end, she makes the ultimate decision. After the MEKAKUCITY are nearly all killed by the Snake of Clearing Eyes, Ayano begs Mary to take her life and turn it into an eye power, figuring that if the snakes can act as replacements for human life, the opposite is also possible. This allows Mary in her queen state to turn Ayano into the Snake of Retaining Eyes, which I mentioned a little while ago, which is given to Shintaro. This means that from birth till death in every subsequent timeline, Shintaro and Snake Ayano both record all of what he sees. Though Shintaro can't consciously tap into these memories until his power is activated, he can communicate with the snake in his dreams, who's constantly trying to get him to awaken for the majority of the series. It's this ability which plays an essential role in imparting the full history of the loops to Mary and MEKAKUCITY actors, which again makes stopping the Clearing Eyes Snake possible. So what we see here is sort of a reverse character development. Up until this point in the series, our conception of Ayano is basically that of a perfectly selfless girl, a savior who thought nothing of her own life if it meant that she could save the people close to her. What the manga then shows us is that Ayano didn't start off that way. She was just as human as everyone else, flawed, indecisive, angry, and even vengeful at times. The challenges she faces put a pressure on her to become the person she is, and to me, I find that an infinitely more interesting character progression. Unless you want to be pedantic and say that this Ayano is a separate character from the following Ayanos, which is technically true, but listen, textually it's still Ayano, okay? Leave me alone! This doesn't mean that Ayano after this point is entirely flawless, though, either. In A Headphone Actor, we see that Ayano doesn't think very highly of herself, even after this drastic development of her character. Despite the fact that she still acts a lot more kindly in later routes, she demeans herself a lot more. Calling herself dumb, insisting she wouldn't be able to push Shintaro like he needs, therefore not being the right kind of girl for him. Keep in mind she's literally on the way to throw herself into the days here, by the way. And then we get the clincher. If Ayano's theory of happiness is the note left on a desk to paint the picture-perfect tale of sacrifice, additional memory is the ugly truth lurking within the heart of the girl about to drop off that ledge. Additional Memory is one of the songs dropped as part of the album MEKAKUCITY Reload, an album that, though it doesn't really contain any songs that are meant to be part of the main story, were made simply because, according to Jin, there just weren't enough songs in the Kagerou Project. I agree, because this one is a pitch-perfect mirror to the velvety sweet assurances of Theory of Happiness. Don't get me wrong, I adore that song, it makes me cry every time, but this one feels so raw, specifically because of what it reveals. The whole premise of the song follows Ayano stuck in the daze as she expresses her discontent, loneliness, and regret with the choice she made. Even now, it's telling us that Ayano is not some kind of completely selfless hero as she presents herself to be. She wanted to be more selfish. She wanted to tell Shintaro that she loved him, and she doesn't want to be here. It's powerful to me precisely because of how real it is, and as a consequence of that, how much realer and three-dimensional it makes Ayano as a character feel. One of the recurring symbolic motifs of Ayano's character is that of paper cranes. This should be no surprise, but this is also a cultural reference, a nod to the Edo period tradition of Simbazuru, the belief that folding 1,000 paper cranes will grant longevity and wishes. In the spirit of the constant duality I've talked about here, I feel like this is so appropriate for her. A girl who only ever wishes for others at her own expense, who against all hope becomes the embodiment of that desperate wish for life and delivers upon it. And because of that, in the end, despite literally haunting the narrative as its most prominent ghost, she gets to grow up too. But wait, it was probably unfair of me to mention ghosts and not mention Kido, right? Oh, I think she might be gearing up to punch me for that one, actually. What can I say about Tsubomi Kido? Honestly, she wasn't one of my favorites back in the day. I was a lot more into characters like Kano and Takane as a teen, and well, frankly, I still kind of love them both now, but I've really grown in my appreciation of Kido over time, and her development across the franchise is a big part of why I feel this way. For reference, Kido's full backstory is explained and explored in the 7th light novel From the Darkness. In it, we learn that as a child, Kido's biological mother passed away, and at her funeral, she met her biological father. Being from a rich family, apparently the guy had his whole life dictated for him, up to and including being put into an arranged marriage that he didn't care anything about. As a result, he had an illegitimate child, Kido herself, with Kido's mother, who is the only woman he ever actually loved. While Kido's presence in the house disrupts what she perceives to have been a perfectly idyllic life without her, she gets to know her older half-sister Rin. At first, she assumes Rin hates her, a literal symbol of instability in her family unit, but becomes incredibly dependent on her once she learns that Rin loves her as a sibling all the same and wants to help her feel like she belongs. Unfortunately, tragedy strikes when Kido's father, after losing his business, tries to kill the entire family so he can take Kido, who he considers to be his only true daughter, and live anew, unchained by his previous lot in life. Kido, sincerely loving her sister, though, kills him before he can attack Rin, and they both die in the fire together before they can escape, which leads them to the daze. Put a pin in this. Obviously after this, she's sent to the orphanage where she meets Seto and Kano, is treated like total shit there, and kinda treats the both of them like shit in return. It's a bad time. Then they're adopted by the Tatayamas, have a few short years of bliss before their adopted mother dies in a landslide, enjoy a tiny bit more time of tenuous happiness before they lose Ayano, meaning Kido essentially loses her beloved big sister again, and then move out on their own. From here, Kido takes a more proactive role, and despite her incredible anxiety towards socialization, becomes the Don's de facto leader in Ayano's place, trying to model herself after the girls who have helped raise her up to this point. She struggles massively with filling the role, a lot more emotional a person than she tries to project, but she too grows exponentially by the end. In the novel timeline, during the big fight where everyone is attacked by the Clearing Eye Snake, Kido is one of the first to go, but upon her death, she recalls the memories she had used her ability to hide away. These memories were of meeting Azumi in the daze and talking to her, an event where, feeling such immense sympathy for her, Azumi shared her story with Kido, taught her to use her abilities, and ultimately got her to conceal not only her memory of Azumi herself, but of the fact that she killed her own father, so that she wouldn't feel burdened by that guilt for the rest of her life. In recalling all of this, however, she is able to remember the name of the Kagerou days, communicating it to Mary before her death so that it can be called forth. Ultimately, though it doesn't prevent a ton of people from dying, it does allow Azumi to meet the remaining children and strategize on how to stop the snake for a time, even if it requires some sacrifices. For her effort, Kido actually even gets to reunite with Rin in the days for a bit, which definitely made me tear up again, don't judge me. It's honestly really incredible to see her take all of the stuff thrown at her and not only continue to get back up, but to use her experiences to reach out to others. Often Kido becomes the person who has extended conversations with other characters in their moments of uncertainty, especially when they're dealing with coming to terms with their powers, and the circumstances that led to developing them for the first time. This is also illustrated beautifully in another MEKAKUCITY Reload song, Never Lost Word, where we follow Kido's journey of self-loathing through her childhood, to her efforts to change herself as a teenager, to finally seeing her post-summertime record as a young adult, looking a lot happier with herself. In her childhood monologues in the novels, she laments that her name, Tsubomi, is one that she hates because of the connotations it has of a flower bud, something that should have limitless potential for growth, but that she feels couldn't be further from her. In the closing moments of the song, we literally see her, grown and content with herself, smiling into the mirror, and as she moves away, a flower is literally blooming in the reflection. I have quite literally never seen a depiction of overcoming your own depression and taking the reins of your personal growth for yourself that made me quite so emotional. It's one that's still really special to me on a rewatch. Even if I do still kind of think Tomboy Keto rules and that her design change, though symbolically strong, does have some whisperings of making her into a proper lady, which I kind of hate. Two sides of a coin and all that. And hey, speaking of two sides of a coin, sorry to keep this character ramble torch going, I still have one more after this I want to get to as well, but we need to talk about Haruka Kokonose. Haruka is a very interesting character in two ways. First of all, he's mostly relegated to flashback because Konoha, the result of his wish, is just that, a result. Konoha is just the Snake of Awakening Eyes given a body, since Haruka himself rejects this body and stays in the days. Second of all, he's one of very few characters in Kagerou that it takes forever to get a personal POV from. Similarly to Ayano, Haruka is a character that we hear a lot about from other people and see from multiple other characters' perspectives, but we never really get to see his own until the 6th novel, Over the Dimension. When I first read this novel, I'll be blunt, it took me a hot minute to even realize at the start that Haruka was narrating, because the way he talked just seemed so un-Haruka-like to my brain. And that was a fascinating realization, specifically because I realized I'd made a lot of assumptions about what kind of person he was, without actually getting to see what he himself thought. Though to be fair, Jin himself does also admit in the afterword of Novel 6 that he initially had a lot of trouble writing for Haruka precisely because they're such different people. He was also homeless for a while writing that one, so I can give him a break for it. But as the novel went, not only do I think Jin found Haruka's character voice fairly well, but that reframing of him fundamentally shifted the way I saw him, and again, made him feel a lot more in depth. In a lot of ways, my initial assumptions of Haruka were as a very pure person, who cared more about making the people around him happy than anything, and who was almost in an, well, I suppose enlightened state sounds a little dramatic, but it's kinda how I felt. This is a guy who has an illness which could literally kill him any day, which has already killed his mother, and he appears to just sort of breezily be going through life as if it didn't bother him at all. In fact, he spends pretty much all of his time cheering other people up and rooting them on. What becomes evident by reading from Haruka's POV, though, is that he's actually kind of terrified of death. Or at least he grows more and more scared of it the more he allows himself to actually socialize and be around other people. He constantly finds himself thinking about how the fun things he's doing now are not things he'll be able to do again the following year, and eventually this culminates in him admitting to Shintaro that he's genuinely upset by how unfair his lot in life is, how much he wants to stay and continue making happy memories with the people he loves, sobbing uncontrollably about it, and even bringing Shintaro himself to a similar state as a result. This late-game peek into his actual feelings just puts into such stark perspective how little agency Haruka has, and Konoha is oddly a kind of perfect reflection of this. As he's not really Haruka himself, he's unable to really provide us any kind of meaningful perspective on him at first. The only feeling of Haruka's that really persists in Konoha is the thought that he wants to continue making friends, but even that's warped and twisted to the ends of someone else when Konoha is possessed by the Clearing Eyes, a fact that Haruka himself laments for being one of the reasons his friends die. But it's also this good nature in spite of the fear he faces every day that makes it possible for Konoha to be the way he ultimately ends up being, a fragment of God learning to cherish mortal life because it is given an opportunity to experience that life using Haruka as its vector. This leads to Konoha also making friends, realizing what friendship means, and ultimately being willing to put everything on the line for the sake of those friends, which is also a fundamental part of the snake's unraveling at the series' ultimate end. I think it's also quite telling that Haruka is an artist, and a lot of emphasis is put on that fact. He's able to convey those temporary feelings, those fleeting moments, into a tangible form that can last even far beyond the lives he and his friends lead. I could literally sit here and ramble about specific characters I love all day, and trust me, I have a spiel like this prepared in my brain for, like, all of them. But we still have a decent amount of stuff to get through, and I can't be adding on to it even more like that, so let's just focus on one more for now, Wait, is that Hatsune Miku? Yeah, you know I gotta talk about my girl NA. She's probably a huge reason why a lot of people even get into the project in the first place, whether because people literally mistake her for Miku, or because they think Headphone Actor is a banger. Both are equally valid choices. For one thing, I just have to say, it's actually kinda cool that Takane as a character just is pretty solid disability representation. She has narcolepsy, but it's never really used as a joke like a lot of other characters with this sort of condition, and though it serves as the basis for her wish, which leads to her becoming NA is a pretty clever extension of that as well. A lot of characters remark on the fact that personality-wise, NA seems a lot more boisterous and excitable than Takane herself, and I think it serves as both a contrast to the amount of exhaustion she's typically going through, but also as an extension of her interests and how she personally identifies herself by them. Before literally anything else, Takane Inamoto is a gamer. She plays video games nigh religiously, and this is just another source of social alienation for her at first, compounding the trouble she already has with people treating her condition unsympathetically. This leads to her in life sort of adopting the typical tsundere archetype, especially when it comes to her crush Haruka. Haruka is also in special education with Takane because of his unspecified heart condition, and the two bond while they spend their time there. They even do this similarly in the original timeline in the manga, where they both have overlapping hospital stays when Takane is temporarily admitted. Takane is brash and feels really strongly, but she's not used to conveying those feelings for fear of being judged and ostracized. She uses this fear to avoid talking about what she thinks, and especially when it comes to Haruka, she doesn't want him to know what she likes because she thinks she may be thought of as lesser for it. So, naturally, it comes as a big surprise when Haruka is not only impressed with Takane's skills with video games, it actually inspires him to take them up for himself. In his mind, it's a perfect thing to focus on and have fun with for the short amount of life he knows he has left. This even pushes a little further for her by the time of MEKAKUCITY Actors, where in contrast to the manga and novels, where she remains feeling pretty humiliated for a while after he finds out her secret, she actually starts to feel more self-confident in herself and her own online persona after Haruka encourages her. It's a gradual progression that naturally ends in similar tragedy to a lot of the other Mekakushi done when Kenjiro, possessed by the Clearing Eyes, kills her so that she'll go to the Kagerou days. Even after the newly formed NA discovers the extent of her powers later on in both the novels and anime, though, it isn't like her condition is magically whisked away. The strength of Takane's character is that her avatar, the extension of herself and her own identity that she's cultivated online, in spaces where she feels more comfortably herself, can literally be externalized as NA through different channels than the physical world. She still maintains a sort of delineation of personality, where in her own body she acts much the same as she always did, but she's a lot more world-weary and mellowed out now that she has a more consistent outlet for the energy she can't always maintain in person. In a sense, Takane's social alienation and NA as a representation of this other side of her personality are emblematic of the sort of niche social spaces that we, as social outcasts, often find ourselves in order to find comfort. She feels a lot of self-consciousness for this at first, especially as a girl who feels an additional pressure of people looking at her oddly for being a girl gamer. But ultimately, this social anxiety through the lens of gaming and being heavily online shines a light on a much bigger, broader issue that her character touches on: the fear of failure. Above all, Takane just doesn't want to fail. She doesn't want to be seen as a failure, as somebody who's wasting her life in pursuit of something unattainable, doesn't want to be seen as broken. When she initially becomes NA, she finds herself drawn back to Shintaro, who she had previously had a bit of a contentious relationship with in life, and tries, under this new identity, to use it as an excuse to change her relationship dynamic with him. In a way, Shintaro socially is similar to Takane herself, something hinted at by the way Ayano talks to Takane about him, saying he needs a girl who's more selfish than him and will push him outside of his comfort zone. For a lot of their relationship, this takes the form of deliberately irritating and teasing him, but in becoming more of an instigator than an instigatee, NA distracts Shintaro enough from his own perceived failure that he doesn't really have time to beat up on himself anymore. For a while, he still stays a shut-in, certainly, but it's always inevitably some prank of NA's that spurs him in one specific circumstance or another to actually leave the house for the first time in 2 years. In the manga, this is particularly heartwarming and breaking, as Shintaro's led to the hospital where he finds Takane's comatose body on life support, her life dwindling. Even so, NA tells him about how becoming a friend to him and trying to counsel him through his own grief over Haruka's death helped her to change herself and to be a better friend.
Becoming friends with you, I feel like that really saved me. So, I think I can safely say my wish was granted long ago. I was able to find some real meaning in a life spent constantly running away, and I couldn't have done that without you. I know that you've always been critical of me, Master, but you're kinder than just about anyone. So much so, you can be someone's salvation. And I think there are still people who only you can rescue. So...
Me too. I was saved by you too. And I'm so glad I met you.
What an honor.
And really, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Even in the deepest depths of loneliness, you can find people who will make you feel stronger for who you are, who will make you feel like your perceived inadequacies aren't a weakness, but something you can manage and better yourself through. When you feel like something is a roadblock, it can lead you down a new path where you may be better equipped to connect with and help people than down that other road where you were bashing your head against a wall trying to figure out why you couldn't proceed. And this especially makes a conversation she has in Novel 8 with Hibiya so fantastic.
Hey, do you play any video games? The question from Minamoto snapped my mind out of the swirl of self-doubt it had fallen into, dragging it back into reality. Video games? I mean, about as much as anyone else, I suppose, but why did she ask that, when every second counts? Thinking about it didn't generate any answers, so I just shrugged and said, a little.
Well, I'm totally addicted to them. Mainly because I couldn't make too many friends, I guess, but up until high school, I pretty much did nothing but play games.
She put her hands in the air and began batting her thumbs around, working an invisible controller. I still wasn't grasping the point. She was starting to irritate me, but I just nodded at her, prompting her to continue.
So my teachers and my grandma kept getting pissed off at me about that, you know? They were all like, you only live once, you know? You can't let those games hook you back in my day, blah, blah, blah. But I was always thinking, games are a lot more fun than real life, you know? You've only got one life to live, but with video games, you can continue as many times as you want after you die. Like, if you think about how you've only got this one chance, it paralyzes you, right? You're too scared to do anything. And even when you lose or die in a game, it still makes you a better player the more you do it. It's like that, just one more game feeling. That's what makes them fun. Makes you stronger at them.
Minamoto turned to me. The smile she constructed on her face had the unmistakable look of grief upon it.
You know, you remind me a lot of him way back when. You're just smart enough that you keep moping around worrying too much about the future. Like you're carrying all this weight you don't have to carry. If you mess it up, just try it one more time. That's the way you gotta approach this, or else you won't get anywhere. Besides, I died once, and I'm still here.
If you mess it up, then just try it one more time? It was so stupidly optimistic, so uncaring of the consequences, so irresponsible. But somehow, the words wriggled themselves deeply into my heart.
And wouldn't you know it, the practical mascot of the series has some wise words here that not only play into her personal arc, but the general narrative arc of the work as a whole. Obviously, it ties into things in a literal way, because, yeah, Kagerou Project is a time loop story. The just try it one more time here is as on the nose as it is genuinely poignant, because while it certainly is alluding to the literal rewind of events, the way the MEKAKUCITY do actually give up their lives for each other and are reborn again and again, it also says something more. Through the ways they meet, support each other, and grow into an inseparable group of precious friends, they continue across time to grow, to change, both for each other and for themselves. They mess it up, mess it up, mess it up, but they just keep trying one more time, because failure is not the end, it is an opportunity to improve. Turns out even something as fantastical as video games can make you a better person in the right context. I know, gamers usually make it look like the opposite is true, but Kagerou is kind of all about the fantastical in a way, or I guess if you wanted to put it another way, Kagerou is also pretty heavily about playing pretend. This is something I haven't been able to stop thinking about since pretty much the beginning of my dive back into the series, because as a motif of the work, I feel like it is pretty far-stretching. Sure, it may be yet another byproduct of the general summerist childhood, coming-of-age stuff, but boy does it have some real depth in how I think it's utilized, especially on a symbolic level. Let's just dissect some of that, shall we? So, first of all, I think one of the most obvious things that jumps out about this right out of the gate is the MEKAKUCITY themselves. A group of teenagers who run around acting like some sort of secret organization who go on missions. But all they really do is hang out for the most part. And oh, they've got special powers in their eyes that tie to some insecurity of theirs from their deep, dark pasts. You literally cannot get any more textbook chunibyo than this. Again, to remind the audience of what this means if you're not already familiar, a chunibyo is a colloquial term in Japan, which basically means 8th grader syndrome. It is specifically that sort of time in adolescent life where you're desperate to feel special, and may sort of play around with having delusions of grandeur as a result. The MEKAKUCITY sort of embody all 3 of Hyoya Saigami's 3 chunibyo types as well. They're generally delinquents as they live life on their own accord, and so many of the lyrics speak ill of their feelings on adults in general who don't listen or care about their problems. They go against mainstream trends in the sense that they all have pretty odd fashion senses and are often associated in promotional material with graffiti, and wouldn't you know it, they literally have the evil eye. The aspiration of special powers is literally an actual plot device in the story. But this slightly more edgy strain of pretend also arises narratively from a simple and more generally heartwarming place as well. It is an inheritance of positivity from Ayano, their big sister, who tried to impart that togetherness in them, that lack of shame over their differences from a young age so that they could hold their heads high and stick together rather than letting the world beat them down for what they couldn't change about themselves. Ayano herself specifically picks this up from watching tokusatsu, the sort of cultural embodiment of a hero for children, not in the sense that it is inherently childish, but that it is aspirational, the sorts of undefeatable titans you watch precisely because they carry with them a sense of human spirit constantly clashing with and overcoming overwhelming forces. In Kamen Rider specifically, the original main hero, Takeshi Hongo, is literally the victim of brainwashing that attempted to turn him into a mutant cyborg, and uses his abilities for the benefit of humanity, literally taking traits of the monsters people fear and using it for good. And this translates almost perfectly into the first story event of almost every adaptation of the Kagerou Project, a group of terrorists holding up a shopping center. As a unit, the MEKAKUCITY use their abilities in secret to sow discord among the terrorists' ranks, disorient, and then ultimately stop them from hurting anyone. It's a wonderfully over-the-top plot which immediately sets the tone for how Kagepro will handle this sort of theming, because while it is almost whimsically silly in its lack of specificity, oh yeah, you know, random terrorists, you encounter those at the shopping center every day, it is precisely the kind of plot you would see in a TV program about a group of young heroes fighting evil. A lot of the points between larger, complex backstory beats in Kagerou Project has what I like to affectionately call a sort of fan-fiction writing-esque tone. How in the world did the MEKAKUCITY afford this sick-ass apartment with everything they need because they're all teenagers and it's basically just Seto hauling ass to work at a bunch of jobs? I don't know, don't worry about it. How does Kenjiro develop an entire video game in a week for a school festival? I don't know, don't worry about it. How does the Clearing Eye Snake build a secret underground lab underneath the school without anyone noticing, where he's able to put Takane's body in a literal stasis tube for like 2 years? Don't worry about it. I mean, granted, they do actually kind of explain this. The Clearing Eye Snake was literally born from a wish for Azumi to know about herself after all, so his sapience and knowledge are basically his ability, and knowing everything about the world, he's easily able to game the system to work in his favor, particularly when it comes to influence and money. But this is more really said than it is entirely explored. It's very much hand-wavy set dressing that, while I can't accept, it's kind of funny sometimes. Can you imagine if he was actually the one developing that video game? Bro takes a break every several centuries from doing murder and long-term planning to do murder to make one shitty Quake ripoff and is like, woohoo, tee, this one's really gonna hook him. What was I doing? Oh, right, preparing to poison a teenager. But to be clear here, this isn't even really a complaint. In fact, I think it literally adds to the overall feeling of the series itself. Bluntly put, if the summertime loop is metaphorically childhood, then shouldn't it stand to reason that a somewhat inexperienced view of the world persists within it? I think these are the times where Jin writing this all at the age of like 21 really comes in handy, because it sort of underscores that awkward stage in life where you're just getting around to learning more about how everything around you works, but there's a lot of things implicitly left up in the air on account of the author's own lack of experience. It's like a 17-year-old on AO3 writing mobster AU yaoi. The mob plot is literally to facilitate the yaoi, so the specifics of how, like, the mob works is obviously not going to be very faithfully depicted with the level of grounded realism. That is okay. I love that for you. This is why, honestly, despite all the faults of the end product, I think Studio Shaft was actually kind of a perfect choice for adapting Kagerou Project into an anime in some ways. Sure, given that Akiyuki Shimbo is the director, you can absolutely feel the Bakemonogatari-isms all over the fucking thing, but it plays a pitch-perfect game of aesthetic abstraction right from the start that just oozes out of every corner of the production. Azumi's story, for one thing, is literally told through end-of-episode bookends as a storybook, an absolutely beautiful rendering of pop-up book-style illustrations that are gorgeously rendered like a literal fairy tale. This same storybook is then used as a book being read to Ayano by Ayaka during her research, with another clever nod to the overarching themes by having Ayano talk about how she's tired of hearing this story over and over again. I'm going to choose to praise that opening scene of the episode and not remember the original 3D CG intro that was used during the television version. Ugh, I'm really glad that they fixed that in the Blu-ray. Another thing that the Shaft anime does really well with this is paint the picture of the Clearing Eyes influence without even really needing to get too into it. The city's remarked upon in other adaptations as advancing rapidly in the past few years, the implication being that it's because of the snake's ties and growing control of it for its own purposes. And this is shown really well in Shaft's typical overly abstract style, where the buildings yawn on for what seems like miles, cities having this almost uncanny appearance to them where everything seems almost overly rendered to the point of being alien. Architecture goes nowhere, seemingly simple locations like schools and huts transform into giant, almost sci-fi-esque stadiums and spires, and even the hero's own spaces, previously much more homely, aren't exceptions to this. Though it does end up further begging the question of those rent prices. What kind of jobs is Seto working, for fuck's sake? I'd even argue this is utilized really well in the opening, Days, where Shido's trademark style of monochromatic character illustrations, with highlighted coloring being done in the specific character's thematic color, is utilized in a very specific way. I don't really know if this was intentional in this particular case, mind you, I could just be overthinking again, but I think it's very interesting that for half of the opening they're like this, and for the other half they're fully colored. Paying attention to those early scenes where the characters are selectively colored, it's always in slightly more mundane contexts, where specifically background normal characters are colored fully. It makes the MEKAKUCITY themselves visually stand out as both different from others and almost heightened in terms of being living fantasies, sort of attempting to escape into the real world. Only in the more high-octane, fantastical sequences of the opening are they allowed to exist in full color, as if they're somehow realer in a story than they are in actual reality, trapped in the confines of their fairy tale as they are. Hell, this even translates to the PV for the full song, where in the highlight color style, the Dan all use spray cans and paint buckets to basically color the world around them, Azumi looking on contently as they all pick up their paints like weaponized creativity against the cruelty they come up against. And this overall sort of lovably juvenile tone, I think, is contrasted very deliberately with the stark and overwhelmingly edgy tone of the various tragedies they face. It's sort of a young person's idea of death in some ways, where everything is so critically dour and completely over the top, and also a hot anime boy is there. But in a way, I think this is also crucially relevant to the overall thesis about death, grief, and the loss of childhood. If the fairy tale of Kagerou's world is indicative of the perspective that comes with childhood, the sudden and monstrous nature of what the kids are put through in various backstories, and in the various bad ends of the series, are like someone going over to your childhood bookshelf and ripping the pages out of your favorite storybook. The brilliant blue of Asumi's diary, held onto by Mary, a literal record of her life and fairy tale romance, are overwhelmed by the deep scar of red burned into all of the Dan's collective lives, as again and again they are ripped away from the comfort and safety of being kids and are forced into situations so painfully adult that they are not yet equipped to handle. Because what is a child to a monster if not easily victimized? And this sort of feels especially on the nose for a villain like Clearing Eyes, frankly. His sole motivation being the perpetuation of his own life acts as both a stopgap to the maturation of the cast and their ability to move on as people, and also as a literal illustration of the older, embittered, selfish adults of the world grinding the youth underneath their heels to service themselves. How many times have we had to look out at the world and see that the rich dinosaurs in charge of it are perfectly content to set it on fire before they ever inconvenience themselves, because they know that they won't have to deal with the consequences, and because they don't care about the well-being of anyone that will live long enough to have to. But he too is not without his own ties to the more fantastical. After all, he's the perpetuator of that stagnant world, right? I find it very interesting that, in case you haven't already been able to tell from the everything about him, the Clearing Eye snake is very much inspired by the serpent from the Garden of Eden in the Book of Genesis. In fact, in the Shaft anime, this is made even more deliberately explicit, as the fairy tale illustrations of Asumi's life become much more complex and gothic looking when they get to the parts about him, depicting her as literally taking the fruit of knowledge as he tells her about how to create the days. God's least favorite aura farmer just really can't get enough attention, huh? But in a sense, he's kind of the opposite of Eden's serpent too, right? In the story of Adam and Eve, they become aware of their humanity because of the serpent and are cast out of a never-ending paradise into the world of man, having lost their eternity as the price of earthly knowledge. By contrast, in Azumi's story, she's already living in the world of man, forging herself through the trials of it and finding love. Humanity is a reflection of herself, and the hatred she experiences may as well also be a vector of her own self-hatred, her own inability to understand herself. She's literally the god of this world, and so Tsukihiko's love for her isn't just a simple story of connection, but also a small part of herself, her own creation, telling her that she is worthy of that love. And when she creates some eternal paradise at the Serpent's suggestion, her own Eden to experience with her loved ones forever, that in and of itself is regarded by the narrative as a mistake. The denial of the finite, the idea of Eden in general, is regarded as a foolish wish because it is something which has no meaning, a perfect sinless existence that by its very nature is empty, unfulfilling, and says nothing. Because if one strives for unending, unblemished perfection, then they have never been given the choice to make themselves better. Honestly, it's part of what makes the actual confrontation between Azumi in Mary's body with the Clearing Eyes in Novel 7 so damn hype-inducing. Does it end in the best outcome for everyone? No, but boy is it incredible to see them both cast off their chains for just a brief moment, long enough to tell the bastard that enough is enough, that his story's getting stale, that even if they suffer and die again, they will only continue to get stronger until he finally runs out of pages to write the same cruel verse with.
I couldn't see anything. I no longer had my own voice. It was too late to remember it all, but I knew the words would come. Then, I opened my mouth. I needed to transmit my thoughts, my will.
Mary, can you hear me? You've got a special power. My friend told me about it long ago. You need to say the name. I know she'll save us all. Mary, I'm sorry I can't be there with you. Take care of everyone for me.
Right at the very end, on the far end of my long-gone consciousness, I heard the words ring clear.
Bring it on, Kagerou days!
Don't make me deviate from my script, you bastard!
Yelped the inscrutable sight before me. Who the hell does he think he's talking to? Trying to take me on. He must have known how pointless that was, no matter how many times the Earth had spun around. Don't worry. You've spun that ridiculous tale for far too long. I'm ending it all right now!
But like I said before, Azumi's story rhymes with many others in the story, and not just in its tragedy either. Mary isn't just following in her grandmother's footsteps in that she's stuck in a never-ending world, but she's also choosing love again and again, specifically with the way her relationship with Seto mirrors that of her grandmother's with Tsukihiko. Oh, I couldn't find a better place to include this, by the way, but I am legally obligated to tell you that Seto and Mary are voiced by Soichiro Hoshi and Kana Hanazawa, which should both be familiar to viewers of this channel because they voice Keiichi Maibara of Higurashi fame and Chiaki Nanami of Danganronpa fame, respectively. I can never get away from either of them. Anyway, familiar, right? A girl isolated out of fear for the world's harshness, comforted by an equally outcast boy who at first sight wants nothing more than to help her. In fact, in Seto's case, this takes on an even more tragic element as further iterations of the story reveal more about him. In Shonen Brave and the final novel, we're told all but explicitly that Seto's stealing eyes from the beginning allowed him to see into Mary's thoughts when they first met and see in some hazy, long-forgotten memories of previous loops that he and his siblings would meet their deaths because of her. And even knowing that, he chooses to be there for her anyway, because he cannot leave someone who is suffering so much alone. Then, even beyond this, we learn in MEKAKUCITY Actors that one of the people who attacked Azumi and her family in the past was none other than what appears to be an ancestor of Seto's. They literally look the same and have the same voice actor, after all. Despite being involved, though, he is the most reluctant, objecting to attacking Shion specifically because she is a child, and while the rest of his group are killed by Azumi, he alone is let free. In a sense, it's this slight act of mercy that down the line allows Seto to be born and to himself repay that love to Azumi's grandchild, the story restarting itself anew all over again. In the closing chapters of the final novel, Seto and Mary are both the only survivors, except for Hibiya, of the fight with the Clearing Eyes, and both desperately try to trick the other into thinking that they're okay. They both carry so much on their shoulders, willing to become villains to protect the person they love, but ultimately, they decide that their story is worth rewriting one more time if they can make it better. Because not only do they believe in a world where they will be happy together again, but they believe in one where nobody they love has to be sacrificed to make them happy. And call that childish if you wish, but I believe that's the most powerfully mature conclusion of all. In the end, by contrast, I don't necessarily think MEKAKUCITY Actor's ending is the most satisfying of all the mediums. It is certainly cathartic to see the culmination of all those threads, especially Ayano's plans from the manga coming to fruition, but the 12-episode count and the fundamental rush of story that's necessary to get to said conclusion does end up making it feel a bit underbaked. Granted, I'm more than happy to see the kids finally get their ultimate wish, I just wish it had been a little more suitably padded out in the visual medium, which would ultimately give it a bit more due gravitas, especially after that novel ending was so good. Ultimately, though, I do still think it makes a pretty good capper to everything in its fundamentals, and I respect the ballsiness of it to really lean into its mixed media origins by treating the other roots as equally important to the whole, rather than trying to hastily recap them all on screen. Because of Shintaro's retaining eyes, he's able to dip into the days to retrieve Ayano, who then uses her favoring eyes to convey all of that wealth of history onto Mary, who vows not to let any of their many loops worth of suffering go to waste. She uses her knowledge of the snake's plans to warp everyone to the days before he can get the drop on them, fulfilling Kinjiro's wish immediately by reuniting him with Ayaka, and since he was always stealing Konoha's body to use as his murder machine, he's forced to fulfill its wish instead. And that wish, to save Hiyori's life, is one so simple and impossible to dawdle on that he's immediately deprived of his sentient existence by becoming essentially a new life source for the girl. The kids all escape the days, the evil is defeated, and the adults of their lives contently stay behind to let the new generation grow. The children are the future and all that. And we end off with Shintaro, once again facing the discomfort of the summer sun, the awkwardness of reconnecting, and the tough choice of making new connections at the same time. But he's living in the present, holding his head high. He doesn't need to hide away anymore, doesn't need to turn away from what lies ahead, because there's something waiting for him, isn't there? This time, he's not alone, and there are many more memories to make up ahead. And if all of them, can do it, why shouldn't you?
みんなが教えてくれた。未来に怯えちゃいけないって。世界を嫌っちゃいけないって。ここからの世界はもう私の空想なんかじゃない。私たちにとって一つだけの本当の未来。
We've been talking about some pretty emotional stuff for a while, so I decided that it might be a fun idea to have a little intermission while we're at it. And what better way to intermission than to address your creeping hunger? I mean, it has been like an hour and a half. And what better way to do that than to make some cute little themed dishes based on some characters from Kagerou Project. I don't know, I just thought that it'd be a cute idea. Also, apologies to the Kage Cafe zine that was being made while I was making this video, which I have been working on for a very long time, by the way. They announced their zine like really shortly after I had this idea, and I wanted to acknowledge that really quick so that it doesn't look like I cribbed their idea. I haven't seen the inside of your zine. Sure, it's really cool. If there's any overlap here by pure coincidence, I apologize. Anywho, starting off, we've got ourselves an entree, and I figured why not base it on our favorite, love to hate him snake guy with a bit of steak of clearing eyes. Yeah, you can tell that I was really proud of that stupid joke, huh? So I thought to myself, how do I make a dish themed after this guy? And the simple answer was, well, he's a snake, skewers, it's kind of like snake shape, also skewering, because he's real fond of that. The steak is purely because of the pun potential. I decided to go with ginger steak because ginger is something that clears the sinuses quite a bit, thus the clearing. And I also went with apple slices because, well, I wanted something to offset the savoriness, a little tart, but also something that has some thematic tie to the snake himself, the whole biblical serpent shit. Now, unfortunately, this process went in a bit of a weird direction. I wouldn't call myself an expert cook on the best of days, but it does tend to go a little bit less than normal when you're enlisting the help of a strange puppet homunculus guy who lives in your closet, and for whom I'm pretty sure that motorcycle helmet is literally just his actual head. So, he had some slightly unconventional methods, and, well, quite frankly, I'm a bit too terrified of him to question them. In any case, we decided to use limes as well as garlic to help tenderize the meat, while also adding the ginger, of course. Mix that up with some soy sauce and butter, obviously, as well as a concoction of spices and some hot honey for flavor. Whipped all that up and made a nice marinade for the raw steak, which was already in chunks, by the way, and let that refrigerate for several hours. Spoilers, probably could have done a couple more. Then we got it out, sliced up the apples, buttered the apples in a mixture which also included some ginger, then liberally sprinkled some cinnamon all over them as well, and put them on the skewers in a pattern of 1 apple slice, 2 pieces of meat, rinse and repeat. Popped it into the oven at 375 for about 25 minutes. And when they came out, they were delectable. Ultimately, for something that was pretty winged, I think we did a fairly decent job. Though I do think that the steak, in addition to being marinated for longer, could probably have just used some more ginger seasoning before going into the oven. That way the taste would have come out a little bit more. As it was a tiny bit on the plain side, but I did still definitely taste it, and the savory flavor contrasted with the tart of the apple and the sweetness of the cinnamon, all wrapped up together into a nice blend, basically exactly what I was hoping for. Honestly, I think it says a lot that I wouldn't mind doing this again, and if we ever do, I think it'll come out even better the next time. So there you go, bastard man, you get a good dish. But enough about him, right? Something sweet is in order. And what's the sweetest thing in this series? Good question, it's full of nightmares. What came to my mind immediately, of course, was UK Yesterday. So I decided to make a little dessert themed after it, the Tut-Tut-Tata Tart. Again, I am so fucking funny. This is basically just a modified lemon tart, but instead of just using lemons, it also uses blood oranges. The nice, full sunset spectrum, with the sweetness of oranges to represent that young summer love, and also the tart sourness of the lemon, because, well, what else embodies the bitter sweetness of God's favorite tsundere at her angriest? To start off with this, we got some lemon and orange shavings going on, as well as the juices from each respective fruit, a bunch of butter sliced up into cubes, and lots of egg, like a lot of egg, all mixed together on the stove with some vanilla extract, and a pinch of salt. This was then strained to remove all the goop and leave only the sweet paste, which, by the way, had a really nice taste to it. Like, genuinely, it was just very soft and homey, almost. It was very sweet, but you definitely could taste the fruit tart, which was pretty much exactly what I wanted to go for. So again, for winging it, this kinda came out perfect. Then we prepared some homemade whipped cream, the heavy whipping cream of which the poor bastard forgot, so I had to DoorDash it for him. Take those $20, thank you very much. When did he get skin, by the way? I didn't know he had that, and it scares me. And then it was all blended up and refrigerated. Meanwhile, the filling was put into tiny little tart graham cracker crusts, which were put into the oven on 350 and kept in there for, well, originally it was 5 minutes, but it actually had to take several longer. We just kind of nursed it for a while. Do what's in your heart. Wait until it's solid, or kind of solid. Then it was all topped off with some confectioner's sugar, put into the fridge to solidify for a while, and topped off with a dollop of that whipped cream and some golden and red sprinkles to keep the color scheme. It was actually delicious. I loved this. I think this was a resounding success. 10 out of 10. It's just what Takane and Haruka deserve after all that. And finally, last but not least, we wanted to put together a little cocktail of sorts. Just because, well, if we're gonna do all of this, it kind of felt necessary, you know? And if I was gonna do a beverage, I figured it'd have to be Shintaro themed. I mean, who else in this series really has an iconic beverage to speak of? I mean, sure, all he has is soda, but I can work with that. This leads us to the artificial enemy. I know I'm really stretching it at this point. This is a mixture of a little bit of black spiced rum, cane soda, and it is very important that this is cane soda, by the way. You cannot use regular-ass store-bought Coke for this shit. It is not good. Some blue curacao, and some cold brew coffee. I figured this should be something sort of energizing. You know, Shintaro is the type to hole himself up in his room and doom scroll for hours at a time, so he's gonna need a lot of energy to stare at the screen long enough for his eyeballs to roll out of his head. We had to experiment a lot with this one to get the balance just right, because surprisingly enough, this is a really delicate line to walk. These flavors do not necessarily want to mix very easily together, but the thinking was that cola goes really well with rum and coffee goes pretty well with rum as well, so maybe the rum could bridge the gap between the two. As for the curacao, the reason for that will become a bit more evident in just a second. Anyway, what we ended up with was basically mostly the soda, with like a third being the cold brew, and literally like a shot's worth of rum. It's not even really right to call this much of a cocktail, to be honest. There's not actually that much alcohol in it, all told. It's mostly about the soda. Once we got our ratios nice and figured out and the taste seemed seemed pretty good, we moved on to the next step, which was egg whites. Yes, you heard me. The egg whites were whipped into a bit of a foam, and the curacao was added to it after that with just a pinch of sugar, until it formed a nice blue foam, and then we added a little bit of blue food coloring for additional blueness, because I figured, well, hey, the relationship between Shintaro and Ene is one of the series' most enduring and most important, and I figured representing that through the drink would be kind of nice. So Ene, keeping in theme with the tart, retains a bit of that sunset orange with the curacao, and the foam is applied to the top of the drink. It's very light, but honestly, it brings out everything else so much more. There's sort of a subtle aromatic quality to it, and when you put everything together like that, it just works. It's honestly really good. And overall, I think that this drink came out pretty solidly. I would have liked a bit of a cleaner presentation with the foam, but, well, you can only do so much with a spoon, can't you? And that's everything we came up with. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the results for all of these. I think this was a fun little segment to do, and if you enjoyed this, maybe I'll do it in a future video for some other stuff. Who knows? Let me know what you think below. But now, our intermission is over, so let's get to the rest of this. I have some more personal feelings to share from here on out.
Where did the summer go this year anyway? It's like it was gone in the blink of an eye. Every year, the question of exactly when summer ends has captivated me. Some people consider it over in mid-August at the end of the Obon holiday. Others hold out until the month comes to a close to officially declare it a thing of the past. Still others, especially my age, peg it to whenever summer vacation ends, while others simply take a vague whenever it gets colder view of things. There are people who even tie it to when the cicadas stop screeching from their sentry posts in the trees. Considering all these points that people use to mark the end of summer, it seems sensible that everyone has their own definition of what summer really is in the first place. I brooded on this. Even if some career politician stepped up to the podium and stated, "Summer hereby ends at this hour of that day and this month," it'd still depend on the weather, on local customs. It'd never go anywhere. Nobody would listen to that blowhard. I know for sure I wouldn't. So what does summer actually mean to me then? I didn't get much of a chance to go out during this one either. Something about the season just never seems to click with me. It'd be nice if I could go out and have a little more fun next summer though. Maybe to the seashore or something, with friends. Or camping would be nice too. I don't like the feel of bugs buzzing around me, but if we all whipped up some curry and rice around the fire, I'd bet it'd taste really special. If I could just really bust loose and take in everything summer's got to offer, maybe that'd help me find it. My own summer. Next year, huh? Kind of far away.
And so we loop back around. Music is an interesting part of growing up, isn't it? I feel like you could say this about just about any medium of art, frankly, but it still strikes me specifically with music how crucial it was to developing my own sense of identity as a teenager. When you're a child, your environment dictates a lot of who you were frankly permitted to be. You're not old enough to really decide where you're going, what you're wearing, or a lot of other things. If you have access to the internet and a pair of headphones though, all your surrounding circumstances can at least be drowned in whatever tune of choice you've got ready to roll with. It wouldn't be an understatement at all to say that developing a specific taste in music when I was young, god-awful as it may have been at times, was one of the most crucial ways I was able to establish my own self-image. I feel like it's the same way for a lot of people. Your internal expression takes precedent when your external expression is unavailable. And considering this project began with music, I'd say that was definitely one of its biggest initial appeals to me. I was always pretty heavily into Vocaloid as a kid. Miku was the standout star. I think I discovered her first through stuff like the Levon Polka meme, then moved on to the heavy hitters like World Is Mine, Rolling Girl, The Disappearance of Hatsune Miku, so on. I was a big fan of Black Rock Shooter as well, and maybe I should talk about that sometime too. Well, anyway, it'd be difficult to understate how much of my musical identity this encompassed at the time, for years even. Snobism, Sasha, Matryoshka, Love is War, Lost Ones Weeping, Bad Girl Online, Two Breaths Walking, Persecution Complex Cell Phone Girl, Ten-Faced, Find the Light, Ghost Rule, Pop Drop Candy, Night Sky Patrol of Tomorrow, Rabuka. Hell, I even confessed to an online crush when I was in middle school by sending her I like you, I love you. And trust me, you don't have to be embarrassed hearing that, because I'm already embarrassed enough for the both of us. I definitely remember coming across Kagerou pretty soon into its life, though I didn't actually start getting more invested in the project as a whole until I want to say when Jubiphonics started doing series covers. That's more or less when I realized that this was an actual thing with multiple facets to it. And having not really gone through any Vocaloid song series at the time, this was sort of a new thing to me. I've been sort of fascinated with the idea of narrative song series ever since, a fact which may be apparent by one of the first big videos on this channel, being a Mystery Skulls animated dissection of all things. Don't go back and watch that video, by the way, it's not very good. One thing that definitely struck me a lot about the series right off the bat, though, because of the fact that it was a Vocaloid-centric project first and foremost, was how rooted in its identity that aspect of the music was. Beyond even just obvious things like NA looking like Miku, there was a particular lyrical emphasis pretty early on, with music being a comfort in a hectic and overbearing world. Kido's silly coat with the MP3 player buttons, and one of the lines of Mekakucity code literally mentioning her iPod as well. The recurring imagery of Seto putting earbuds in Mary's ears to drown out the harshness of the world around her, and that being the way they bond until she finally leaves her forest home. Beyond the grievances with adults the songs expressed, there seemed to be some acknowledgement of how music itself, and these songs by extension, were a saving grace to the ostracized. Even something like Headphone Actor, so much more dour and bleak, frames that struggle for survival through Takane's own voice pushing her forward from her own headphones, a simple question to herself of whether or not she wants to survive. If so, she just has to keep listening, keep running toward what she wants. And I think that alone was one of the things that opened the floodgates back in the day for so many people when it came to this fandom. Music is both powerfully magnetic for self-expression and also decently accessible. There's a reason why there are plenty of Kagepro fans out there who haven't even delved into any of the multimedia aspects, simply sticking by the songs themselves because they alone convey some of the story's most important things without even needing to do any additional lifting. A lot of the core ideas of self-acceptance and love, of togetherness and community, of grief and bravery, all of that is conveyed beautifully through these 3 excellent albums worth of songs that frankly I'll still listen to any day of the week. But I think obviously for those who ventured the extra mile, it was also well worth it. I remember reading the manga at first and being confused. The midway point where Clearing Eyes shows up to clean house did raise my eyebrows even if I'd listened to Outer Science already. But between that and the anime releasing in 2014, one thing that also just immediately became apparent to me was that I adored these characters. Seriously, while I will never say that Jin is a perfect writer, in fact I have plenty of issues with his writing, which I'll get a bit more into later, I will say that he kinda hit a home run when it came to creating the Mekakucity, because I'd be hard-pressed to think of another group of dweebs that is easier to fall immediately in love with, and hell, he even agrees with me there.
I know I complain all the time, but I'm having a constant blast writing these. I sincerely think to myself, man, I wish these guys could be my friends as I write. I'd just love to dive into the world of the novels and hang out for a while.
Even just reading slice-of-life side content is worth spending a little more time with them in my mind. From the extra manga chapter, Lost A Hour, to the mystery game video series, Seek at Mekakucity, to the mini-manga for the Mekakucity quest event in Enoshima, to the many, and I mean many, manga anthologies that have been released for the series too. I even watched that little 40x short film for the series, which wasn't that good, sorry Shidu, just to get a little more time with them before wrapping up my venture back through everything. For a story like this in this format, I think nailing that kind of group dynamic is paramount. If you can make me attached to and care about a ragtag group of misfits, chances are your story has a much bigger chance of sticking its landing emotionally, even if the other parts of it can be rough sometimes. And it's precisely because they're so varied and versatile. I feel like anyone can come into this group and find one of them that reflects their own struggles back at them in some way, maybe multiple even, and that combined with the nigh universal relatability of catchy tunes gives you a formula pretty ripe for success, especially with teenagers from the start. The dynamics are so much fun to follow along with, especially because they remind me so much of myself and my own gaggle of misfit friends at the time. The forged sibling bonds of the Meika Trio and Ayano, the awkward school-time crushing of Takane and Haruka, the bickering but genuinely unbreakable bond between Shintaro and Ene, the calming senpai-kohai bond between Kido and Momo, the genuinely sweet way Momo tries in her own way to be a reliable senpai for Hibiya. I could go on and on. The series really did become sort of a rehabilitative space for weirdos and sad kids who just needed a little communal home to occupy while they licked their wounds. The fandom itself was its own Mekakucity in a way, trying and struggling to deal with themselves, but relieving that pressure by relying on each other. And instead of going to the theme park together, we all listened to Japanese music videos, I guess. In fact, I very clearly remember spending a lot of time, once I got really into the story, role-playing as various characters. My old Kagepro fandom role-players sound off in the comments. I'm pretty sure I role-played at various different times for Shintaro, Kano, Takane, also Clearing Eyes once. Go figure, the guy is actually kinda hard to roleplay as. He's compelling in a conceptual way, but since he's pretty single-minded in his main goal of killing a bunch of teens, it's surprisingly difficult to work him into different scenarios. Kinda just always feels like, well, why would he talk to Sasuke when he could just be throwing Hibiya in front of a truck again, you know? Also, compounding all of this was the fact that as a story that was releasing in multiple different mediums at the same time, all of which were told non-chronologically, all of which were then revealing different pieces of information at different times, which would inform the past events of the others, there was a lot, and I mean a lot of guesswork going on. That was kind of part of the appeal, frankly, the theorizing, the crafting. Kagerou is in a lot of ways kind of a mystery story, where you as a reader are trying to retroactively piece a lot of information together from the various routes the more you learn. But I think in a way this level of flexibility that came with a necessary amount of confusion led to Kagerou as a fandom being, if not terribly accessible all the time, still very involving in how personalized it could get. There's a reason why I think you see a lot of projection here, and I don't say that as a bad thing, because you had to put a lot of yourself into the gaps back in the day to even really understand what you were looking at, or at least try to. As a depressed teenager, let me tell you, I vibed hard with Ayano's whole deal. I related to Takane a lot as well, being that she was both kind of a repressed nerd, embarrassed of her interests, but also a very passionate person who didn't know how to express her emotions well. To say these kids really tap into some very honest feelings you have when you're young is putting it mildly. And it was always nice because as over the top as it could often be, it felt earnestly edgy in a way that was never talking down to you. Hell, I'd say this persists even now. Let me tell you, I don't believe for a second that Jin ever wrote this with intention, but rereading Novel 5 and seeing the way Kano takes such immense joy in, quote, living as a girl when he turns into Ayano as a kid, and only being able to change back to his standard appearance by feeling pain, because that's all he can associate with himself, combined with the multiple instances of official artists drawing him as a girl, oh yeah buddy, you better believe that scan is especially revelatory to me as a trans woman. I'm just saying, more people need to be talking about this because holy shit. And even now, as an adult, I'm finding more aspects of other characters to see myself in that I didn't before. I especially see something aspirational in Mary, someone who is ostensibly so young and so consistently put through the ringer, but who at the end of it all is able to find contentment with the people she loves and come out the other end smiling. There's real strength to that. I guess the moral of the story is, don't f*** with teenage Fujoshis, they will literally kill you. Also yes, she's canonically a Fujoshi. Based? Oh wait, her favorite anime is Black Butler. Well, it was 2011, I'm sure she'll figure it out eventually. It's just so comfortable to me to know that even if this group is small, relatively speaking, there are so many people out there who had similar feelings to me about this series growing up, feeling like they grew along with it. I remember very distinctly one summer trying to get my ex, who is still one of my best friends, into the series. We were going to a birthday dinner with my family over at an Olive Garden of all places, and while we were waiting on our table, the both of us were crammed into a seat sharing earbuds and watching the video for Outer Science. It was super confusing to her at the time, but she still loved it, and though she didn't give it to me for that reason, I still have a red scarf from her that to this day I think a lot about whenever Kagerou pops up in my mind. A lot of specific songs really trigger those specific memories too. I remember listening to Days and Children record over and over, being enamored with Lost Time Memory the first time I saw it, and the Danganronpa 2 fan video for it. And buddy, when I tell you I was ecstatic and felt my hyperfixation roaring back to life when Additional Memory came out, oh god, it was apocalyptic. Never had my Ayano projection been more pronounced than that day. I remember watching Never Lost Word for the first time and crying my eyes out, both because I felt the emotions of it so strongly, but also because I was just genuinely proud of Kido, this fictional character, for her personal growth. Because I had become so attached to these characters that it was like watching a friend grow up. My tenure throughout middle and high school was turbulent, to say the least. I've talked a lot about it here and there on my channel already, but suffice to say, being a part of the Kagerou fandom was a huge help to me at that time. I still have most of the first two albums loaded up onto my phone's music library, which I don't even really use anymore, specifically because I bought those albums on iTunes with Christmas gift cards when I was at the height of my obsession. They're still there now, and are probably some of my most played tracks in my library from that time. Even now, I still listen to the songs all the time, and Kagerou remains one of my biggest creative inspirations. I can definitely trace a lot of things I do with stories and characters back to Kagerou. I've drawn lots of art inspired by the songs for my own OCs to get a beat on their vibes. Hell, a D&D campaign I was part of for 6 years had a twist villain that I made that I would say took heavy cues from both Mary and the Clearing Eyes combined, and that is a very scary sentence for people who know both of those characters well. Also, no other place to put this really, but you know how I mentioned in passing earlier that Jin and I share a passion for the manga Konjiki no Gash? Well, you'll never believe this, but a couple of years back I bought a full set of it from Japan, and the seller sent me a little thank you note. That seller's name? Literally Ayano. You can't make this shit up. Anyway, all of this isn't to say that the series is perfect, of course. Nostalgia glasses aside, my revisit did definitely highlight a lot of issues I hadn't been too aware of as a teen. The novels especially have a pretty strongly prevalent streak of weird, sexist, gender essentialist nonsense that got really annoying to read read at the best of times, even if it did thankfully improve a fair bit in the last 3. Shintaro talking about how Kido seems more like a proper girl when she's in an apron and making him breakfast. Okay, what the hell. Momo's self-image issues being a constant running joke, which feels especially mean-spirited since she is literally a 16-year-old girl. Hibiya being a little pervert to Hiyori, taking creep shots and secret recordings of her. That sucks a lot. The adult men in Hiyori's village talking about how she'll make their boys into men. Extremely gross. What the fuck? That made me very defensive of her right away, and I can't say I like how she gets treated, both by a lot of people and even the narrative itself a lot of the time. Thank God she actually got stuff to do in the manga. There's also just the fact that Jin, as a creative, is clearly struggling, being as young as he was when he wrote it all. This is a fact he even acknowledges himself in some of the novels afterwards, and yeah, I can see it. His narratives work brilliantly when he can paint the broad emotional strokes in music, something he's really adept at, but when it comes to actually fleshing out all of the in-between, it's clearly a task for the guy. He struggles a lot with distinguishing personal character voices, though I assume it's a little clearer to tell in the original Japanese text over the somewhat clumsy translations. And he does have a bit of a habit of backstory creep, let's say. You've probably noticed that in addition to being an extremely layered and complicated story, not a lot happens in the current day of Kagepro, as the current day narrative is mostly a culmination of a lot of prior events. It's a very specific kind of story for that reason, and I don't blame anyone who finds it difficult to tackle as a result. It is definitely a product of its time in those ways, and while I do love me a good throwback to things I love, I think it's important to highlight sometimes there is a moderate line to be found here. We can't let nostalgia blind us to legitimate issues, and while I still love Kagepro dearly, and am capable of being critical of it while maintaining that love, I don't want us falling into the more insidious trappings of Retrospect here. Times were simpler because we were young and didn't have nearly as many responsibilities. There's no mythical past to yearn for here, and Kagepro itself is pretty insistent that we keep moving forward, so if I want to take away the good that still very much exists in it, I need to be willing to listen to that point it's making too. Though, putting it bluntly, it probably needn't have remained entirely in the past if it weren't for something pretty sad. After the release of MEKAKUCITY Reload in 2018, things seemed like they were on the up and up for the franchise. A new anime was apparently going to happen at some point. Jin had announced plans for a spin-off series and sequel with new music, new manga. He'd even expressed interest in novelizing MEKAKUCITY actors to round out the imperfect anime with some additions of his own he felt hadn't been brought to us properly yet. 2021 saw the release of Children Record Reboot, a fantastic new version of the iconic series opening track with updated art that was only a small part of a forthcoming project of redone MVs and collabs with other artists. And all of those plans fell completely through. You see, it turns out, signing a bunch of contracts with a bunch of, frankly, predatory media companies when you're barely an adult full of creative passion and more than a little inexperienced in the industry, it gets you taken advantage of. Big time. You see, because of the multitude of people that had their fingers in the Kagepro pie, yep, we're bringing that back from the start of the video, Jin had landed himself in a situation where essentially he was put in a bit of a bind. He owns his original compositions, but the story, characters, and iconography he created associated with those things, they're all licensed out to a ton of other people, meaning that he himself doesn't own any of it. And by later 2021 to 2022, all of those plans I just discussed basically permanently stalled out because of this. Jin himself doesn't even know where the copyright for his story lies, and while I have hope that one day he'll win the custody battle and get those kids back, we're sort of at a standstill now. The series has been on indefinite hiatus ever since, and while I'd love to wish that this year will finally be the year that Jin will announce something big and make this part of the video immediately irrelevant, I'm not holding my breath. Compounding this was the release of a new song from Jin in October of 2024 called Summering, which, while not legally tied to Kagepro in any way, skirts around its hallmarks so clearly that it feels almost transparently to be an intended commentary on it. It also marked Jin's first collaboration in years with Shidu, so yeah, come on. The song itself laments the transient nature of summer memories, and ultimately takes a tone of holding them close but moving on for your own good, which seems pretty evidently to be a sign from Jin that he's more or less done with the series now. And hell, while I hope he's got more in him if the situation ever gets cleared up, I can't necessarily blame the guy. It'd be painful to know you couldn't do anything with your darling anymore. And I'd probably have to move on for my own sanity at some point too. Still, there is a note of hope. The same month, I think because of some collaboration or other with Project Sekai, I could be wrong about that, I don't play the game, Jin released new versions of both Kisaragi Attention and Summertime Record. And they're absolutely wonderful versions of the songs. And if you scroll the comments on these and the reboot of Children record, what you'll find is a group of people still dedicated to this story even now, sharing their memories of when it meant so much to them in ways that genuinely choke me up. Listening to this children's record, even though I'm no longer at an age where I can be called a boy or girl, they're still my important friends. And even though I've surpassed their age from back then, they're still the older brothers and sisters I admire. I cried my eyes out because this was the song we always sang at the end of karaoke sessions when I went with my deceased friend. Thank you, Jen. I remember listening to Summertime record back then, crying because I didn't want to grow up. That version of myself has always been there, in a corner of my heart. I can't listen to it with the same youthful feelings I had back then anymore, but it makes me want to hug that little bit of me. I was a primary school student back then, and now I'm a working adult. Summers are much hotter than they used to be, but they're still enjoyable. I tried to hold back my tears and say goodbye. There's no way I can do that. I'll always love you. It's really great that those days that I and everyone vaguely remember are things that have ended and are gone, but I realize that things have truly continued from there. Thank you. Miku's lisp made me feel like I was listening to my childhood self singing as an adult, and it brought me to tears. I can't go back to that time, but no matter how much time passes, Kagerou Project is my summer, and a treasure. And really, that's what Kagerou Project still is to me. It is the brilliant, scorching summer, unbearably hot, yet ripe with change. An ever-expanding world where the young can chart their own courses. It is a brilliant blue memory of hazy, daisy days, a treasure that will long persist, perhaps left behind, but never ever forgotten. I feel like everyone who's ever cared about this project feels that way, because even after so long apart, I never fail to see them again when the summer rolls around, talking about those precious days of joy, pain, and growth with each other. For those children who wiped their tears and joined their hands, of which I was one, I wanted above all to make this video to say, hey, how's it going? It's good to see you again. You may not remember me, or even have really met me at all, but we're all still here. Hanging in there, right? Man, it's hot today. But I don't hate it, you know? This is my class reunion, for all of us. And if it's okay, I'd like to ask if a few of you could speak your minds too.
Hi, I'm Juby, or formerly known as Jubyphonic. I first discovered the Kagerou Project probably when I was in high school. I was definitely getting really into Vocaloid at that point, and there was something about the Kagerou Days song and video specifically that really caught my attention, because at that point, Vocaloid was starting to kind of marry art and music and story in a way that really appealed to me as like a musical theater kid.
I was introduced to Kagerou Pro in middle school, and my friend pulled up his iPhone and showed me Konoha State of the World at the lunch table. It wasn't until I reached high school that I would really get into Kagerou Pro, more specifically its online communities. I would roleplay as Ayano, and I would meet so many cool people and make friends that I still talk to this day and will probably continue being friends with for life.
It was around late 2013-ish when I was looking around for new Vocaloid songs to listen to. I absorbed as many different kinds of Vocaloid songs as I could, and some of those were Kagepro songs that I didn't know were connected to each other at all. It was only when I watched Otsukimi Recital that I recognized the reference to Wang Yanpu's Kagerou Days music video, and then I started looking into things more.
I got into Kagerou Project through my best buddy when we were moving into our first apartment in late 2020. A time where the world was going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and I had just graduated college. You'd notice that it's particularly late in the Kagerou Project game, which had its heyday in, I'd say, 2014. So I'd hear folks saying that the fandom or project as a whole was dead, which was far from the case.
I got into Kagerou Project in January of 2014, so it was a little bit before the anime came out, and I was on Facebook looking at images of anime girls, and I saw one that I wanted to see where she was from, so I reverse searched the image, and it took me to Ayano Tateyama's fandom wiki, and I read a little bit of it, and I saw status deceased. And I decided, maybe not in this life, Ayano Tateyama, I'm not interested in your super sad story, so I closed the tab, and I moved on with my life for a couple of days, because my older sibling, who was always sharing stuff they were into with me, they were like, have you heard of Kagerou Project? It seems like something you will like. So I checked it out, and I did like it. A lot.
I really can't exaggerate how shocked I was to find out that so many songs I thought were unrelated turned out to be part of such a complex story. Once I started researching into it some more, I couldn't stop myself. The manga was only at about chapter 18 or 19 back then, but I read through it all and I watched through all the songs at the time, and I was already obsessed enough to be called a fan of the series.
And before I knew it, I was kind of following this story, and there was like this big community online around it. And I think I was definitely not a big YouTuber at that point. I was just kind of doing it on my like school YouTube. I would upload school projects to. And by the time I moved to a real account, I think when I put out Yobanashi Deceive, people are like, oh, you're doing the whole series. And I was like, yeah? Am I doing that? Which honestly, I was totally down for. I was just like, it was kind of that SpongeBob meme where Patrick comes home and like there's all these people under his rock and he's like, who are you people?
I got into Kagerou through Jubiphonic's covers. And at the end of one of them, I believe it was Children Record, she put, congrats on the new anime. And so I wound up hunting for this thing, and I could not find it.
I studied little details like the MEKAKUCITY's numbers and colors, I played beam eps of the songs on Osu, and I was hyped for MEKAKUCITY actors before it even aired when all we had were the short little character trailers.
So I got into Kagerou vastly underestimating how big of a phenomenon it was, funnily enough. A friend of mine who knew that I enjoyed short anime recommended a 12-episode long anime with a Medusa in it, and that was it. Now, if you know anything about Kagerou, you know that you do not start with the anime. You start with the music, you start with the manga, you start with the novels, anything but the anime, so of course I was completely lost.
I found the manga, I read all of the manga, I was obsessed, and my dad actually had watched the anime. When I had described it, he was like, oh, I think I watched that. It wasn't good. So I begged him to find it again, and he threw it on. We watched the first episode, and he was like, yep, still not good. I was entranced.
And of course, that means I both saw and participated in MEKAKUCITY actors having an initially abysmal reputation that then grew into the fandom being like, perhaps I treated you too harshly.
I liked piecing together the story through all the various mediums, and Will Setson's covers and Breadbox's video essays really pulled me in, and now Kagerou is my favorite story of all time. It introduced me to the Vocaloid community, and I think that's part of the reason why I love singing as much as I do today.
But it was awesome because it felt like there was this community that, even within the Vocaloid community, I had kind of stumbled upon, and it was obviously super creative. There was art, there was music, there was all this fan work that was going on, and I didn't notice, but I had become a part of it. And I would say what Kagerou Project meant to me at the time was probably community.
I've gotten the privilege of seeing this series build on itself more and more as the years went by, and I could list off several moments in fandom history, like the gradual localization of the manga and novels, the Manga 2 plot twist in general, or the MEKAKUCITY Reload album dropping, but I'm already struggling to cram as many thoughts as I can into this little segment, and I'm kind of scared I'm gonna go over the time limit.
Without Kagerou, I don't know if I would have learned more about Vocaloid or how music as a medium could tell stories or really how online communities or fandoms would work. I don't know if I would have learned how to design and sell merch or organize or participate in fanzines or even coordinate events and zine jams and conventions.
The words, "this story changed my life," are thrown around a lot, but it's not hyperbolic of me to say that it really did change mine. Seeing the passion of the fans helped give me the courage to helm massive reanimated projects for the Kagerou music videos, something I'd have never been able to do without the support of the community.
I watched the entire show. I made all my friends listen to me talk about it. I couldn't make them watch it, but then I wound up starting a dub for it, and I met some of the most important people in my life through it, and I wouldn't have done that if it weren't for Kagerou. So it means the world to me.
I don't know if I would have met these wonderful friends that have been part of my life, and I don't know. I can't imagine my life without it at this point.
I was in high school. I was pretty lonely. I was not very socially adept, but the community was just so creative and so giving. They really would just like accept you as long as you were also creative and you were also just in love with the series like them.
Shortly put, one of the most important parts of Kagerou to me personally is how it invites you to research its lore with open arms. It's the type of series that feels like you kind of have to dedicate yourself fully into it if you really want to understand what's going on. And so it feels like it rewards someone like me who loves obsessing over details like that. And mind you, my little blurb is only about the lore of the series. I'm gonna leave the emotions and characters and everything else to other people, but just know I really love those a lot too.
When I first found Kagerou, I latched onto Ayano Tateyama specifically as a struggling suicidal teenager, but now over a decade later, now that I've made it past the age of 18, much longer than I ever thought I would, I find comfort in Kagerou as someone who's struggling to be the very grown-ups I had once been so afraid of.
I am happy it stayed with me over all of these years because Kagerou Project is a love story. We can make jokes about how depressing it is because it's truly a really ridiculously sad story, but it is so hopeful too because it is a story about friendship and reaching out for help when you need it and growing up.
And I think now that I'm much older, obviously I saw kind of, the highs and the lows of the Kagerou Project, and it brought me some of my happiest moments on YouTube, but it did fizzle out. And now that I'm 30, looking back on it, I've recently been to conventions, and there are people that come up and they're like, oh my god, have you heard about the Kagerou Project making a bit of a comeback? And I was like, what? Like, I'm having more people come to the table when I'm like signing things and be like, oh my gosh, do you have anything about the Kagerou Project? Like, I'm such a big fan. I was like, I haven't seen or heard from the community in so long.
And I don't think there's anything like it where at least one day a year on August 15, the community gets together just to say, do you remember this? Wasn't this great? And the amount of love Kagerou Project has in it and the amount of love us fans hold for it, I think it is something truly special, and I am forever grateful for it.
And I got to actually go to one of their meetups at Anime Boston. They were everything that I remembered. They were so kind. The inside jokes still rang true. And it was awesome. And it felt like everyone who had been there back then was like all grown up.
For me, Kagerou is a story of perseverance and optimism, that no amount of failures can define a person or their future, and I try to champion this belief to myself and everyone I come across. The characters speak so much to me and mean so much to me. The amount of failures that they go through and how they approach combating despair and hopelessness really moves me. Like, one of my least favorite characters from Kagerou kind of shocked me into realizing, okay, by comparison, my life is really not that hard. So if these characters can go through all this and still be optimistic and still smile and still cherish each other's bonds and memories, why can't I? And it really helps me to keep going and to keep being there for those around me.
Kagerou Project, to me, is a story about what it means to grow up and experience the world around you. On the precipice of my adulthood, it was comforting to have something say, hey, you never actually stop experiencing new things like you did when you were young.
Kagerou in itself is a story about growing up, even if it's not entirely clear what that means, but I'm glad it's been able to grow up alongside me.
Those things could be so terrible and dreadful that you want to hole up and never experience the world again, but they could also be exciting, wonderful, and new. So I guess we'll just have to take that risk again and again.
To me, there is nothing more beautiful than being able to greet a new summer day with a smile, confident that the future will be brighter than what came before.
As a 30-year-old now, I would say, looking back on the Kagerou Project, I think it was kind of a gem. And that's not just me saying it because I was a big fan, but I think there was something really revolutionary about being able to, have this intense storyline, the light novel release, and then the anime release, and have all this kind of extraneous, media that all still came back to these amazing, beautiful music videos.
And I'm sure that I'll continue listening to the songs for many more years to come.
I'd always hoped that that would be the future of Vocaloid, and in many ways, it was. So I think, for me, still, Kagerou Project definitely was the community, but also, I think, was an interpretation of Vocaloid and of multimedia that I think just really, really was looking towards the future. And yeah, I kind of miss it. I think there's a lot of projects out there now that took inspiration from it, and wherever Jin is now, I hope that he knows that he inspired just so many people to do what they're doing now. Me, obviously. Kagerou Project made me.
Today is August 15th. The summer sun blazes in the sky, insects chirp out in the grass, and anyone unfortunate enough to be trudging around out there is sure to have sweat pouring down the back of their necks already. The scenery is distorted in what feels like a haze that never ends, and inevitably, sitting in a bedroom alone as always, a timid girl turns 30 years old. Except I'm not really sitting alone, am I? It's 2026 in this story, by the way. I've met a lot of lovely people since 15 years ago, both in and out of this fandom, and believe it or not, as quiet as things tend to be in said fandom, it's not like it's entirely dead. Cool fan art and fan work is still being made here and there. I've come across some cool as hell fan music videos in the past few years, and there are some excellent reanimated collabs for some of the series' most iconic songs that I'd highly recommend checking out. For the past several years, there was even a fan Kagepro convention held entirely online called DaysCon, which featured some excellent panel discussions, community events, and so on. I have to say I'm a little sad I only discovered it after the final one was held, though. As for Jin himself, he still seems to be trucking along. He'd floated the idea of quitting music there for a while, but although he hasn't released a song in about a year, he's still been up to some things, talking recently about how he wants to get back to streaming and maybe even do live performances again at some point. Said most recent song he made was a song featuring Miku titled Blue Bag, which has its fair share of obvious Kagepro references, following a Miku who, despite her struggles with music, gets her hands on a bright blue guitar and feels the passion and rush of it all coming back to her. The lyrics talk about turning your wounds into expression, into music, about failing to forget that which burdens you, but using it as a fuel to continue shining on. I think the guy's gonna be alright. And as for the MEKAKUCITY, the fans keep them alive. Hell, I even out of curiosity subjected one of my own friends to the anime on a trip I had earlier this year. I was curious to see the perspective of someone who had no prior engagement with the series, and though they said they definitely felt like they were missing a lot of context, they said they still really enjoyed the ride, and wouldn't you know it, the characters and their interactions had a lot to do with that. Go figure. Would I love to see more Kagepro at some point? Of course. But even if this is all we got, I'm glad we got it, because that in and of itself has already meant a lifetime worth of memories to me. Kagerou Project is something special, something that, while it may not be the most tightly written, or polished, or relevant thing on Earth, it is, at the end of the day, deeply honest and passionate about itself, and really fucking cool. And that's what all my favorite stories tend to be. In the afterword of the final Kagerou Days novel, Summertime Reload, Jin has this to say to close things out.
It's kind of funny to think about, but even though I wrote this, I still feel like I don't really understand these guys. They're your characters, you might protest, and you're right, but I really don't feel that I created them at all. It's like I was in a constant conversation with them as I wrote. I expended a lot of effort getting to know them, and I had to think about what kind of things they were thinking about the whole way. The result, I suppose you could say, is Kagerou Days. Pretty funny story, really. Anyway, this volume is the concluding novel of Kagerou Days. That long, long summer has reached one of its potential closes. As a lot of you know, way back in the day, I released a number of musical tracks on the net under the Kagerou Project umbrella. These Kagerou Days novels got their start when my publisher, listening to these tracks, suggested that I should put out a book. I leaped at the offer at the time. I'll get to weave my tale in a book, I can't believe it! But the writing process after that was a long procession of suffering.
I couldn't write well.
I couldn't bring across my ideas correctly. I received a lot of criticism. I was discouraged, and at one point I was so distraught that I wasn't sure I could continue with it. That I was able to write up to this point anyway is thanks to all my readers saying, I like Kagerou Days. It might sound really cheesy when I put it like this, but they gave me a lot of courage. It's thanks to them that I wanted to keep going with this story, no matter how much people looked down on me or treated me as stupid. I couldn't thank all of you enough, and the only way I can make up the difference is with the series itself. Once again, thank you very, very much. Oops, I'm almost out of space. One more thing then. All the awkward heroes of this story are also the friends of the awkward you reading this book, so I hope you'll hang out with them somewhere else again. I'm sure they'd love to see you. I'll see all of you again somewhere. Thanks very much for reading. Jin.
And the thing is, I know I will. You see, I didn't just mention the fact that my birthday is August 15th because I think it's a cute little link between me and Kagerou Project, because I think it makes me God's most special Kagepro fan or whatever, but because I feel like these memories are a gift in and of themselves. Whenever another year has passed, and the summer heat beats down on me, when I know I'm 1 year older and that gets me down, that malaise never lasts for long. Because you see, even as slow-going as the Kagepro fandom can be these days, they always show up for the Heat Haze Day. The feeling of memories, of looking back on my younger self as I mature, is inextricably tied in my mind to the feeling of looking online and seeing people I didn't even know were part of our little club crawling out from under their rocks, donning their blindfolds, and posting Kagerou Project fan work. I never see these kids anymore. We've all grown up and we've got things going on in our lives after all. But when I do see them, that's how I know it's my birthday. We meet up, we smile, we talk about the old days, and then we're back out the door. The summer is brief and brilliant, but we'll always see each other again, because we'll never stop growing. We can't turn back the clock, but we can always remember. So everyone, look alive! We've got a bit of summer left before the fireworks start, so make the most of it while it's here. Happy 15th birthday, Kagerou Project. Thanks for being around for half of my life. I can't wait to see you again next summer.
I think we're probably friends.
Look at that.
Alrighty. Everyone will make a couple mistakes.
Alright, got it. Get back to you. I can't get the cap off. You're such a weakling. Come on!
But I think it'd be nice for this to continue. No matter what. Even when we become adults. Forever.
MEKAKUCITY complete!
Hi, thank you for watching my surprise, impromptu, really self-indulgent Kagerou Project video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. I've had this idea in mind for a video for like a few years now, honestly, but I kind of felt like doing it this year in particular was going to be the most fitting time to do it. It just felt very thematically appropriate, and I was going to be very upset with myself if I didn't actually buckle down and do that. So I've actually been working on this video since about March-ish, and I didn't tell you guys. I was keeping it secret. Well, if you were paying attention to the amount that I was talking about Kagerou at the time, though, it probably wasn't that much of a secret. Look, I didn't formally announce it, though. That's the same, right? I also want to give a huge shout out and thanks to the people who helped record for the testimonial section. I really appreciate that. I wanted to reach out to people who I knew were kind of in the trenches, as it were, back in the day, because I wanted, again, for this to feel like a reunion for all of us who were really into the series back at that time, and I wanted that energy and that emotion to feel infectious. I wanted that to come across. So I really, really appreciate the people who contributed to that. Go check their stuff out, please. And obviously, if you appreciate what I do here, feel free to subscribe, feel free to comment, like the video, all that YouTube stuff. I have a Patreon, it's linked below. It's probably linked below. I don't know. YouTube is weird about links now. I'll probably have to figure that out. And speaking of Patreon, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now if I didn't have the lovely support from the people over on my Patreon. By the way, if you want to contribute to it, you also get access to my Discord server, so that's cool. But anyway, those people definitely make what I do possible, so that's why I'm gonna read out a list of them now, which I always do, but I'm saying it like it's really special for some reason, because can you tell that I didn't script this part? Anyway, thank you to
Cyberlink420, Serena Midori, Shogun DX, Friend of Dracula, Claire, Ali Oliver, Claire Meeboon, Bailey, Noelle Hadley, Joseph Adams, MJL, Lord Omega 12, Stage Lights, White Toast, Hollow Transient, Layfam, T, Saxon, 16 Crows in a Trenchcoat, Indigo, CJ the Magic Goose, Niche Fish, JS, Phantom Falcon, Sadboy Alert, Space Battery, Moiba Alsue, Big Yellow, Digimaniac 33, Sable Cowl, Elaine Allfelt, Queen Elzyme, Deviant Witch, Clovercool, George, Noah, Cynical Toaster, Luna, Jane Yarley, Matt Hop, Jeff Ladd, Torterra 454, Seditious, Junepop 45, Jordan Finch, IVP, Jedi Real, Cloudy Day, and Ashley and Carrie.
Okay, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. This one was a really special one to me, and I've been meaning to do it for so long, and I'm glad that I finally got it out of my system because, yeah, Kagerou Project is just really special to me, and I'm very glad to have been able to talk about it finally. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!